committee to order. And then unfortunately, Maureen Fleming couldn't make it tonight, so we will schedule to have her come at a very soon future meeting. Margaret.
Okay, seeing the presence of a quorum for Union 26, I will call that group to order. William?
Here.
I'm not sure. Jennifer?
Here.
Gabrielle? No. Katie?
Present.
And Sarah Bess?
Here.
And Margaret?
Excellent. All right. So unfortunately, our minutes also did not get uploaded today. So our first thing we can partake in is our public comment. I do have 2 voicemail messages.
Richard Seelig. I'm a Pelham resident and member of the Conservation Commission and the Community Preservation Committee. I am opposed to creating an artificial turf athletic field in Amherst. According to a poll by The Atlantic, 83% of National Football League players said artificial turf is a real concern. In a study that the NFL conducted from 2012 to 2018, the league found that players have a 28% higher rate of non-contact lower extremity injuries when playing on artificial turf. Foot and ankle injuries occur more than twice as frequently on turf fields as opposed to natural grass. The NFL Players Association is on record calling for the abolishment of fake grass. The following are quotes from NFL players. Even warming up on the turf field in Minnesota hurt my knees. You wake up in the morning feeling 10 times better after you played on grass compared to when you played on turf. On Thanksgiving Day, I was watching the game between the Green Bay Packers and Detroit Lions played in Detroit, which has an artificial turf field. I started to notice that every time the ground was impacted by the ball or a body, a small cloud of black dust puffed up. That, I understand, is crumb rubber, which is finely ground used automotive tires. People who have played on artificial turf fields have told me that crumb rubber is ubiquitous. It gets into everything and can even be inhaled. Do we really want kids breathing in this stuff? I know I wouldn't want my kids inhaling fine particles of discarded tires. Thank you.
And the last one.
Hello, my name is Miriam DeFont. I am a Shutesbury resident and a member of the Conservation Commission. My comments tonight for the Regional School Committee are my own personal views. I am the mother of 3, all of whom played varsity sports at Amherst Regional High School. I was involved in the leadership of the Ultimate Frisbee Booster Club for many years and have done more than my share of fundraising for ARHS teams in my day. As an environmental advocate and parent, I care deeply about the quality of the playing fields that our youth are using. After a careful study, I believe that artificial turf for the track and field project is ill-advised from the standpoints of the environment, player safety, and the costs to the contributing member towns. My comments tonight are directed at the remaining unanswered financial questions. In March 22, the RSC set a deadline for the fundraising efforts for this project. And on January 17, 2023, the RSC was informed that only $61,000 of the anticipated $331,000 had been raised by fundraising. There have been no updates since that time, and the RSC has not revisited its endorsement of the artificial turf option. Inflation and lagging donations now threaten the vision of improved playing fields. Our youth deserve better fields now, not 10 years from now, and the public has a right to know where this project stands in terms of financial viability. If other funding sources are insufficient, I want to say I am personally opposed to the use of corporate sponsorships to fill the gap. There's been no public discussion about what sponsorships might mean for the culture of youth athletics, but the public has a right to know what kinds of advertising would be allowed on school property, whether businesses would be given any exclusive rights to sell or promote goods at sports events, how the district would vet donations and sponsorships so they do not create conflicts of interest or pay-to-play arrangements. And finally, how would the district handle sponsorships from companies that espouse positions, whether social or political, that are anathema to our community? I, for one, believe corporate sponsorships will further monetize our youth and pressure them even more than they already are to sing for their supper. In the interest of transparency and accountability, regardless of your view on artificial turf, I urge you to demand the district to provide an updated status report on the fundraising efforts, and that prior to the consideration of even the possibility of any corporate sponsorships, that the RSC engage in a robust discussion with the public about the role of fundraising and sponsorships in the athletics program. Thank you for your time.
Okay. So I did not receive any written comment. Were there members of the public that would like to, you can come up and have 3 minutes?
Evening.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Is this on?
Yep.
Good? Okay. Hello, my name is John McCabe. I live at 57 Glendale Road here in Amherst. I'm a parent of an 8th grader at the Amherst Middle School. I would like to address the recently released Title IX investigative report about last year's troubling events at our middle school. First, thank you for the opportunity to speak and for all the work that school professionals and committee members that you do. Thank you. And thank you for making the Title IX report available to the public. I strongly recommend that everyone read it very carefully. Even in redacted form, the report sheds very clear light on events that took place at the middle school last year. But most important, the report underscores several glaring issues that I, as a parent, hope and expect this committee and the superintendent's office to deal with openly and honestly going forward. My 3 main takeaways from this report are as follows. They're brief. Number 1, hiring and promotion decisions in our school district must be based on professional qualifications and appropriate experience. I, like so many of us in the district, strongly support hiring policies that actively seek to diversify our workforce at all levels to much better reflect our student body. That needs to happen now, and it needs to be done right. Any honest reading of the report makes clear that some of the worst behavior detailed there was committed by a group of relatively new hires who were brought into the district to help us move forward toward our diversity goals. There is no way you can read this report and not be shocked by some of the words and actions of the school counselors and administrators involved. Read it for yourself and see. Number 2, proper evaluation and documentation of professional performance on a regular basis is essential. Without documentation, personnel decisions and investigative inquiries when problems arise are jeopardized, as the Title IX report makes painfully clear. Hearsay and he said, she said is not good enough. Third and last, and most important, the Title IX report ends with words taken directly from our current arms policy on harassment prevention. Our school professionals, and I here include school committee members, must be held, and I quote, to a higher standard of appropriate behavior when serving our students, our parents, and our town. With this requirement in mind, I would like to add my voice to the complaint submitted by members of this committee at the last meeting regarding the inappropriate handling of the strictly confidential, unredacted Title IX report by committee members Jennifer Shaw and Anna Hurd. Whether their irresponsible behavior has opened the school district to legal jeopardy and possible money damages remains to be seen, and whether their conduct constitutes a violation of their responsibility as school committee members, a violation that is worthy of their removal from this board, also remains to be seen. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. You can just come on up.
Thank you. My name is Maria Kopicki. I live in Amherst. It has been 20 months since this committee limited itself to artificial turf, a product that we now know to be dangerous to humans, harmful to the environment, and financially untenable. I will focus tonight on finances. We have about $3.4 million in hand to spend on the track and field project. Another $250,000 from member towns has been left on the table but is available if a grass field were chosen. Fundraising has reportedly received only $61,000, well shy of the $331,000 mark set 1 year ago, nowhere near the $1 million goal promised originally, and millions more away from the costs of their promised products. It has been nearly a year since fundraisers have been asked to produce any evidence of their progress. The promise to the Amherst Finance Committee back in April 2022 was that the district would not allow the high school's unusable track to languish for lack of funds while in pursuit of a larger project. A split vote there allowed the project to proceed, but with stern warnings. Quote, "The school committee has to be ready to move forward with just doing the track rather than the bigger project if the money doesn't come up." Quote, "I would hate to see that we didn't raise the funds and we're still going for the large project, and 2 years from now we still haven't done the track." Quote, "My fear here is that we're going to get to the point we'll be right on the edge and folks will postpone and postpone, and that the $1.5 million we've appropriated will get eaten up by time and inflation." And yet here we are. The timeline dictated by this latest RFP would push start of construction out to 2025 at the earliest. By then, cost escalation will raise track surfacing to $1.8 million. The 2 grass field options will have gone from less than $4 million to $5 million. A typical, likely crumb rubber artificial turf option will have risen from nearly $5 million to nearly $7 million. And the specialized products promised by fundraisers would be much more than that. And no one has yet to explain where we would find the millions of dollars for replacement costs every 10 years or the purchase of specialized equipment required to maintain this artificial turf. The fiscal realities are already clear. We must stop putting off the inevitable and bring people together around a solid plan that our students can start to actually use as early as 2025. Another regional school district in our state faced the exact same situation that we do. They have just broken ground on what is almost identical to our option 2 for $4.3 million. We can have that too, but we must work together, and we must pivot now to build a new, expanded, accessible track and grass field. The only realistic but less satisfying alternative is to simply resurface the track. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Deb Leonard, and I live on Old Farm Road in Amherst, and I'm here to raise an issue with the superintendent search process. I've spent a lot of time over the last 2 weeks going through board docs and looking at meetings, and I notice a lot of work and detail and focus in this area, and I appreciate that. But I might be missing something because there's a lot of moving pieces, and y'all are working really hard. But from where I sit, it looks to me like you're preparing, possibly today, to vote on a job description that a somewhat stripped down search committee is going to work with a timeline that they haven't developed themselves, as is traditionally done with a search committee. So the search committee, as I understand it, is to review applications, interview, and make a recommendation, instead of, again, the orthodox, or maybe not orthodox is the right term, but the conventional approach, which is having the search committee do that, having the subcommittee form the search committee, and the search committee create their own timeline, decide about search firms, access public input. So I'm really confused. The subcommittee was impaneled the end of September, and it looks like you're looking to seat a search committee sometime towards the end of January, so close to 4 months later. And at the same time, a job description has been developed with a minimal amount of discussion in these bodies. By my count, 5.5 hours overall discussion about the superintendent search process. Only 30 minutes or so of that was actually about the job description itself. And so you have a search committee working with a search firm, which seems like you're leaning in the direction of going with a firm that traditionally doesn't work with a search committee, works directly with the full committee. And I wasn't able to access the timeline from the 14th. You might want to check the permissions on the links on those documents. But the public input part, I'm not, is that a warning or I'm done?
You can finish your thought.
The public input part, I'm not sure where that fits into the process. If the job description is written, who's receiving that input and what is being done with that? So I just encourage you to take a step back before you make a vote and push those timelines out to the public so they could have a little bit more information about the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tom Fanning. I live in Pelham. And don't leave Pelham out of the name of this school, please. Amherst-Pelham Regional High School. Thank you. I'm here to encourage you to rescind your choice for artificial turf on the high school track renovation project. I ask you to consider 2 points. First, the worldwide struggle to save the natural earth that this project can be part of. And second, the broad educational goals in your current policy manual. Before I address those points, let me explain why I'm invested in this project. In 1987, I was elected to the Pelham School Committee and appointed to sit on this regional board. I served on both boards for 6 years until our sons graduated from the Amherst-Pelham Regional High School. When the regional high school was renovated and expanded in the mid to late 1990s, I served on that building committee. A new library, this library, was one of the improvements most in demand for that project, as was the reconstruction and enlargement of the track and its infield playing surface. That infield surface was eventually built with Kentucky bluegrass sod. That surface remains in place today, 25 years later, due to the care given by the turf management experts from the town of Amherst. 25 years of organic soil building through carbon sequestration. 25 years of safe playing conditions for our students. 25 years of financial benefit from the natural turf grass that was prudently maintained. Now, here are the points I would like you to consider before proceeding with the replacement of the natural grass with artificial turf. First, England's Prince of Wales, Prince William, created a worldwide organization, Earthshot Prize in 2020, to search for and scale the most innovative solutions to the world's greatest environmental challenges. Our high school track project can be part of the Prince's effort. If you choose to continue with natural grass, we will adhere to 3 of his goals: protect and restore nature, build a waste-free world, fix our climate. My second point concerns your policy manual. In goal number 8 under policy ADA, K-12, broad educational goals, you ought to make sure that each learner is provided with, quote, the knowledge and understanding of the balance between humanity and the environment, and should develop attitudes and behavior leading to the intelligent use of the environment. Choosing natural turf over artificial adheres to your policy and provides an example of how humanity can choose to use the environment intelligently. Thank you.
Was there anyone else that wanted to make public comment? Okay. All right, so our next order is an update from the subcommittee for new superintendent.
So, as this committee probably knows, our RFP for a search firm was published, and the deadline to submit proposals was November 20th. The subcommittee for a new superintendent met on November 20th, and we reviewed the proposals that were submitted. There were 5 proposals that were submitted. Actually, could you open up the memo? And as Sarah Best alluded to, we've changed the name of our subcommittee to SNS, Subcommittee for a New Superintendent. So we received 5 proposals, and the names of the firms are listed here: Charter Oak, NESDEC, New England School Development Council, Sunshine Enterprise, KDG Support, and McPherson and Jacobson. So we reviewed the 5 proposals, and we used the criteria laid out in the RFP document to rate the 5 proposals. So of the 5, 2 of them didn't meet the minimum evaluation criteria, so they were deemed unacceptable. The remaining 3 we went over and discussed in detail, and we used the comparative evaluation criteria in the document to rate those 3. And ultimately, all 4 of the subcommittee members agreed that McPherson and Jacobson's proposal was the strongest. And they had extensive experience doing superintendent searches for public school districts. There was a detailed description of their process, which included robust community engagement. And there was a lot of emphasis in their proposal on recruiting diverse pool of candidates. And in addition, their price proposal was the lowest of the 3. Doug, I'm sorry, whoever, can you go to the, there's another attachment that has the summary of rating sheets. So we each had like a grid that we used for each of the proposals, and this is a summary of the grid. So the higher the points, the better the proposal. So you can see each of our columns for each of the 3 proposals that we reviewed in detail. And McPherson and Jacobson was by far preferred by all 4 of us. And we all, rated them separately, individually, and then we came together to discuss. So in sum, McPherson and Jacobson had, more than double the points of the other 2 search firms. The other 2 search firms, I'll say, had extensive experience doing searches, just not for superintendents for public schools. They each had, a list of past projects and past searches that they had worked on, but both of them didn't have any superintendent search experience. So we all felt that by far McPherson and Jacobson was the clear strongest proposal. I'll pause and see if any subcommittee members would like to add anything.
One thing I would say, too, to support the decision is that in addition to not telling us about any superintendent searches, none of the consultants who were mentioned by the other 2 firms had any educational background. McPherson and Jacobson has a number of people who've been teachers, superintendents, other kinds of administrators, but the other 2 search firms, their consultants indicated absolutely no experience in education.
So I'll take any questions if any committee members have questions. Okay, so I guess I would suggest, I would make a motion that, I'm going to make this motion for the Regional School Committee, that the Regional School Committee vote to approve the hiring of McPherson and Jacobson to conduct the superintendent search.
Second.
Vote to approve the hiring.
Discussion.
I know, I'm trying to get the wording for the motion
Sure,
right, sorry.
yeah.
Vote to approve the hiring of
McPherson and Jacobson to conduct the superintendent search.
Thank All right,
It needs to be
discussion.
Separate motions.
Any discussion from the region?
Oh.
Looking like no discussion, we will go for a vote. Oh, we're not remote, so
Just vote.
we can just all in favor, raise your hand. Excellent, thank you. Passes 8-0-0.
I would entertain the identical motion for Union 26.
Second.
Discussion? Any discussion? All right, then all those in favor from Union 26? Looks like it's unanimous.
May I continue? Thank you to the joint committees. This process has been longer than we had originally expected, but I'm really pleased with the outcome. So thank you for those two votes. So I will also add that the subcommittee had intended to bring back the superintendent job description, or rather, the input that the joint committees would give to the search firm about the superintendent job posting. We had intended to bring that back today. Unfortunately, we had a meeting posting snafu, and we weren't able to have an additional meeting. So we're going to meet again on December 6th, and then we'll bring that back to the joint committees on December 13th, or whenever that, December 12th, whenever that middle of the month meeting of the joint committees is.
Thank you. Was there anything else from the,
I don't know, do we want to just clarify how the subcommittee for a new superintendent is moving forward? With the hiring of this new search firm, they're gonna take on some of the duties of gathering public input. And we, in partnership with the subcommittee, we'll be hosting several community sessions to gather input about what we're looking for in a superintendent and some of the things that we would use to attract a new superintendent and things like that. So the job description draft that we have started is really just a framework to give to the search firm. All of the terms are blending together. The search firm will then take that draft and add to it and finalize it with the input of the community. And then we will seat the search committee, who that in January will then receive any applications that have been submitted, review the applications with the help of the search firm, and select candidates for interviewing, and then do a preliminary interview with those candidates, and then make a recommendation for finalists for the full committee to then consider. So, we have a revised timeline that we have posted. I think it keeps shifting a little bit because things get a little bit delayed, but we're hoping to get things back and moving quickly. But we still have every intention of putting out an offer in April so that we can have a superintendent in place by July.
thank you. Katie?
Can I just get clarification again of when that link will be available for community members to apply?
Right, so we had originally hoped for December 1st, but again, because of our meeting posting snafu, we're going to finalize so the joint committees empowered the subcommittee to move forward with to make decisions and move forward with the form, the interest form, and the outreach plan for the search committee. So we're, I think, 6 days late in that we're going to decide all that on December 6th. And use the input that we gathered last time, and hope to publish that in the following week or in early December. So that and we still have a robust outreach plan to get the word out to the community about that opportunity. And just while I have the floor, I just want to say, in terms of next steps, I will contact McPherson and Jacobson tomorrow to inform them that they've been chosen. I assume there's going to be a contract assigned, and I assume that the chairs will need to do that. So I'm just looking at Doug. Oh, Doug needs to sign it. Okay, good. The interim superintendent will need to sign it. Okay, so I'll be in touch with you, Doug, about any of the details of hiring the search firm.
Margaret?
I just wanted to add that one of the things that we really liked about McPherson and Jacobson is their willingness to have meetings with groups of stakeholders in the community. That was not a strong input in the other RFPs that we reviewed. So that was encouraging. And also the fact that they were the only ones who listed some of the places they would go for seeking out diverse candidates. They actually specifically mentioned things like the Black Superintendents Network and a Latino organization. They were the only ones who did that. So just a little bit more information.
Thank you. Yep.
Just to clarify, is the outreach opportunity available to students as well?
Yes, absolutely. Great question. So our plan is to have hopefully at least one, hopefully two students on the search committee. So we will be communicating that to students, and the plan is also to have posters in the high school that say, hey, students, here's this opportunity. We're going to have hopefully two students on the search committee. So that's part of our outreach plan, is to make sure high school students are aware of that. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Katie?
Just to thank you to the SNS for all your work and just keeping the momentum going on this despite breaks and things like that. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for all of the work you've put into this. It's clearly a lot. And once, the subcommittee for the new SNS will continue to update us at every meeting like we have been, perfect. Okay, great.
I move to adjourn Union 26.
Second.
All those in favor? And I'm going to depart. I can watch you on the recording.
You're going straight home to do that.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah.
All right. You're up.
Hello. Pull the mic a little closer. Yeah, just a little clarification on the contract with the search firm. They technically are contracting with the district, which is why either myself or / finance director, which I'll talk to in my update in just a second, would have to sign the contract and put that together. So speaking of updates, from the standpoint of finding a finance director to fill in, we've kind of worked through a process of seeking some candidates, looking at internal people, and so formally, by virtue of the way the state laws and regulations are written, you can have one finance director. So we will bring to you at your next meeting, because we have to put a contract together and that sort of thing, a person who will be titled in that way for the purposes of meeting the state requirement. In other words, essentially having signatory sort of authority as the finance director. However, what we're really going to do as far as actual personnel is we have two staff currently in the business office who will work as kind of co-directors, and then we have a third person we're bringing in from the outside that is going to be a business office administrator that's going to be filling in that way. And so I think there's a lot of complementary skills that those three people have to cover the work that needs to get done. So it's an additional responsibility and workload for the two that are already on staff. It's additional work for this other person that's coming in. And so they actually start tomorrow, the person that's from the outside the district. And so we'll be working on, spend a little bit of time with them tomorrow, hopefully to sort of, refine, tasks and responsibilities, that sort of thing. There's some experience that the new person, whose name is Jessica Eichhorn, I want to say that properly, will be in. There's some experience she brings that is helpful to our district, an area where we're gapped a little bit as far as what we have as far as knowledge, so she'll be able to help us. There's lots of things that she wants to learn in the process of being able to support us, but also is looking to be career-wise sort of heading in this direction of, or exploring this as a potential career direction as a school business official. So she's interested in picking up skills that we can provide her and experience we can give her to do some things firsthand. You know, it's one thing to, you know, theoretically do a budget. It's another thing to actually have to do a budget. So there's going to be aspects of that and other things. And we'll, you know, the tasks will be, you know, shared and worked through cooperatively in that process. So we've got a plan in place for trying to cover some of the workload that I've been sort of chipping away at as best I can between other things. So that's the sort of bigger piece of news. The other thing I have in my superintendent's update is our family centers in the process of their coat drive. Every year they do a coat drive this time of year and do a tremendous amount of work to provide support to families in our district and get coats to kids. And so they're in the process. That's very successful so far. I think there's a few more pieces to that to go. They try to do it in a cooperative and productive way. And so I just want to mention the great work that they do and a lot of other staff besides the Family Center. They kind of coordinate. There's a lot of other people that are involved in other ways to provide support for families in our community. And so I just want to compliment them on that work, which they do every year, and remind people there are a lot of folks with need in our community, and you know, we try to find ways to support them and a lot of generous people in our community as well that want to help out. So I just want to give a bit of positive attention to those folks for the work that they do and the efforts they've made on behalf of some of our students and families in the district. So those are the two primary things I wanted to mention in my update. So I think I'll actually entertain any questions people have, but and then there's obviously other things in the agenda we'll talk about at length later.
Katie?
In terms of hiring, this is Anya. In terms of hiring 3 people, how does the salary and benefits package of those 3 people compare to what was allotted for your salary and benefits?
That's a great question.
It sounds much more expensive, so I'm curious, like, why, or what is the difference?
So it's actually not too bad, all things considered, because the thing is 2 of the 3 were already on staff, right? So it's an augmentative amount of support for them. And then, you know, the 3rd person is coming in and spending about 20 hours a week. And so that's, you know, decidedly more moderately priced. So I think that, you know, to be honest, we're at a even sort of standpoint, if not less expensive.
And if I can, the decision to kind of spread this out over 3 people as opposed to hiring like 1 person, what was the thought process or what led to that decision?
Well, there's some in-house, you know, expertise and capacity. You know, as far as, you know, they're not from a time standpoint so much because people had full-time jobs already that were asking them to do some other things or in addition to their regular work. And then the candidate that came from the outside was one that had some of the things we needed, but not all of them, and not enough to be considered sort of a standalone and fully capable, you know, finance director in and of themselves. So that's part and parcel. It was a best fit of you know, capacity and capability across the people that were available.
And the reason why I ask is simply because there's a lot of administrative support, and I just want to remind that we lost a lot of paraprofessionals, and I'm always thinking, how do the students most benefit? So that's why I wanted to bring that up. How do we keep the focus on the students? So, thanks.
Are there any other questions? Katie?
Mine was a different topic. I just wanted to ask you to give us an update about where you are with the report writing in response to the investigation reports.
Well, no, I've made some progress on it. Was hoping to spend a fair chunk of time on it this afternoon, and that was not how today played out. That's sort of how things happen sometimes. So, you know, process-wise, you know, there'll be a little bit more to do, and then, and by that I mean not a tremendous amount of things I'm putting into put a framework together, and then I'll work with you know, principals and administrators to look it over and augment and you know, supplement what I put in as a frame to begin with, and then we'll go from there.
Would you be able to provide us a deadline by which you will complete it? Because as people read these reports, the urgency of your report is getting more and more relevant.
Well, I think that, I mean, one piece to keep in mind is there was an outline of process steps that were put in place in August that we're executing against those. Those are a fundamental component of this as well, but it's also about bringing that and additional things, to bear in a new report. So it's really, I think as far as, I'll do it as quickly as possible, I guess is the short answer. There's no delay for any other reason than time, and there are only so many hours in the day. And that's true for myself and any of the other administrators. There's a number of things that, I've been trying to do the finance director job and the superintendent's job at the same time, and then also attend to some of these tasks that are related to what we're trying to execute relative to this series of reports and what actions we need to take. So all of those are simultaneously being juggled, and we're trying to execute on that as best we can, as quickly as we can. There are a number of things that are sort of in process and occurring and may never make it in any report that are part and parcel and fundamental to being a better district that may be so subtle or so nuanced that they don't actually make it into sort of the sort of text and formality of a report, but nonetheless are the kinds of actions that people are taking and attuning to, and reattuning to as we go through the year. And so there's a lot of that that's also going on and being attended to as part and parcel of this as well. So, we'll continue to sort of chip away at getting this done. There's no delay intentionally. It's just a matter of the time to get it in a format that's readable and functional for everyone, both internally and externally. I think conceptually, myself and others have a very clear picture of what kinds of things we need to do. It's a matter of sort of putting it into form that has meaning and actionable steps that you can, follow along and execute that are where we're working on it.
Thank you. Anna?
So a little bit in connection with that, I think one of the reasons that we've been pushing the hiring of a finance director is specifically because of this. You're splitting the superintendent job with other duties, and it's, making it difficult to do 100% with the superintendent's job. In addition to the fact that I want to check back on the HR director position, because this is yet another position that's half-filled. And even if you hire an interim HR director with the full capacity of an HR director, they will be able to fill in that role better than people who are like almost not quite ready to be an HR director but can fulfill some of the HR director roles for a year, because you want the next superintendent to be able to choose the HR director for themselves. I think that we need an HR director, and that director can hold that position for 1 year or 2 years while the next superintendent gets installed and figures out all the systems and then decides exactly what they want for a new HR director. That's fine, but I think we really need an HR director.
Thank you. Were there any other, William?
I noticed I was trying to help a student last week fill out the bully harassment form, and there was technical difficulties with that. Has that been fixed?
Yes.
Okay. And then because it took a very long time and having to retype things with the student multiple times, like 5 times, is there a way that on the form that you could have, like, if you can't submit this, please email your report to, and have a person's contact on there? Just because to bring a student to actually fill out the report 5 or 6 times and not know if it was ever submitted is pretty frustrating for a student to have to deal with.
Yeah, and I think that, that's a sort of difficulty with all technology is it's great when it's working and it's horrible when it's not. And this was a circumstance where for a period of time it was not working. So it was helpful to know that that was a problem because we did, immediately reach out to our tech support relative to that product and try to get it resolved pretty quickly. They had actually, before we reached out, had noticed there was some issue with it, and we're trying to resolve some things, and actually we're going to make some sort of some fundamental sort of technological changes on the back side of things to see if they can resolve, some of the issues they were noticing as well. But nonetheless, adding some text is like that to sort of, remind folks is if the form doesn't work, what are the other options? Sure, we can absolutely do
And
that.
then do you have any updates on how often the form has been used?
I did, but then it's been a couple weeks, and then I literally thought of it while I was walking over here tonight. It's really, it's a fairly quick thing to get an answer on that. It's a fair number. Trying to call secondary a lot higher numbers than the elementary, I'll say that. I don't want to guess at the number right off the top of my head, but I will give that to you.
And then do we have, like what happens when the report gets filled out, where it goes, and the different steps that take place?
Yeah, so
I've heard generalizations, but I haven't heard of like a specific plan.
So there are a number of people that receive the report. I'm one of them. I generally don't look at them because there are others that are in the process of that. At the secondary level, the deans are the sort of first layer, but the deans, the principals, central office staff like Marta Guevara and Faye Brady receive a copy, initial copy of it. The deans are the first tier of investigation. And so their responsibility is to then take it and follow through and do the investigation. When they file their investigation report, that same group of folks are notified of that investigation. And that's sort of, there's completing that form, that's not the entirety of all of what happens, because depending on the results of the investigation, it may have implications for disciplinary action, which is a sort of parallel and not cooperative, but there's a parallel process that's also simultaneous because the nature of whether it is or is not bullying, harassment. There's very particular definitions of that. So there's a finding relative to the actual is it bullying, which has very particular legal definitions. It may not be that, but there may very well be significant actionable steps relative to discipline and discipline in a very broad sense. I don't want to we often tend to think of discipline as far as things like suspension or that kind of thing. There's a lot of disciplinary action steps that aren't as draconian as that involve, safety plans, restorative justice. There's a whole spectrum of things. It depends on the students involved, the nature of what it was, how it played out. So each case is kind of unique in how they're resolved and what's appropriate in the circumstances. So that's where the sort of nuance of the work that the deans do at the secondary level, in cooperation with the principal, and then if necessary, then those other administrators like Faye Brady is in special education, or if it involves other things like Title IX related, that sort of stuff, where Marta as the Title IX coordinator would get involved. So, there's a number of pieces in that puzzle, but really the sort of fundamental is a number of people get notified, deans take it from there as the first step. Principals are engaged in that process along the way. They sort of are the next sort of tier in the process. But of course, if the investigation doesn't result in necessarily bullying or specific allegation being proved, and that again has some particular definitions from the state's point of view, there's often a lot of other follow-up and ancillary work that's getting done by the deans as they communicate and work with students and teachers and support personnel, et cetera, et cetera.
And the person who files the bully report, do they get a report back in a timely fashion, or what happens?
They should be, and whether we're being as timely as we should be, as far as, well, there's two pieces that, are we being timely with investigating, and are we being timely with getting our reports done too, right? So that's a balancing act. We're trying to be timely with both, and that's an area of emphasis, and we're actually gonna spend some time this year, some additional time this year in working with some of our legal counsel on some of that and ways to resolve some of these, because like I said, this sort of cases get complex, right? The nature of the kids and the problems and who all's involved, can get, rather intricate quickly. And so that's where, we're setting up some opportunities for our deans to work with counsel on to have a broader lens about how to approach some of these kinds of things. That's not to diminish their own experience and expertise by any stretch of the imagination, but it also just gives a different sort of lens to it that can be very helpful in the process of going through these. I think we do have some timeliness issues, I'll say that. We're working on trying to be more timely with the work. I mean, obviously if there's, sort of immediate threat situation, we try to be as prompt as we can relative to that. Could we be better? Absolutely.
Right, Anna?
So as a follow-up, after a kid submits a bullying report or somebody submits a report on the form, how long does it take for someone to get in touch with that person?
I think it depends. I mean, the short answer is I don't know exactly. I think it depends on the circumstance, but the nature of those kinds of things, I think that, when the bullying report's submitted, the email goes immediately. So, if it's 8 o'clock at night, they're not gonna get called the next day. But really, some action should be taking place really kind of the next day, or the same day if they, it's one thing, it's like, you can email at 2 o'clock, you may not have an opportunity to see that email until the next morning, right? So it's really within a day or so we're trying to have some level of follow-up is the goal. And I think that like I said, it's an area where we need to do more work and to be better.
Yeah, William?
If a student or a family or parent, whoever filled out the report and they don't feel like they're getting any answers, what would you suggest that family or student to do? Who should they go to?
Well, I mean, they can, obviously they can go to any trusted adult that they feel. So if they have a teacher that they have as an ally in the building, they can certainly, connect with a teacher and say, hey, can you check on this for me? I didn't hear anything. I haven't followed, So that sometimes is a teacher, sometimes the guidance counselor. Obviously the deans are a great resource. Principals are as well, but they're being pulled in a number of different directions. And at the secondary level, we have one person sort of covering that whole thing. We have a number of assistants. They're also equally helpful in that regard. I think that, from an actionable standpoint, you're looking at, deans, counselors, and trusted adults and teachers to be fellow advocates for you as far as trying to get some answers to that and pressing for those things.
And I guess if I could suggest maybe in the next handbook that we put out, that we map this out so it's in the handbook.
Anna?
So, can you remind me what the plan is for hiring a middle school principal?
Well, that's agenda item 2.
3. New business.
B.
Excellent.
So we'll get to that.
All right. Any final questions for Doug? All right. I do not have a chair's update, so moving right along, are there any school committee announcements? Looking not enough. All right. We are flying through today. Look at us go. Okay. Update on the track and field project. Doug?
Yes. Adjust the. Well, I had hoped that we would be in a place where we might have made a final decision on the proposals. We haven't yet. We're still seeking some information. So the folks that I've been working with to review the proposals, I'm trying to think when we last met and when I told you the last time. Sorry. Right. So we had an interview with both proposers that we had that were, sort of qualified proposals. We had interviews with both of them. They were excellent. Both companies that are proposing to do this design work for us are excellent. The committee reviewed the proposals, the interviews, considered those things. Then we looked at the price proposals. That then prompted some other questions, and so we're seeking some additional information about the price proposals from our proposed candidates, and we'll see sort of where that leads us. So we're still in process as far as finding our preferred company to do the design work for us. I think long story short is both are very, very good. So I think we're looking for the sort of really subtle pieces of this that are going to be helpful for us in a process that will need to be fairly public in its nature. So that's some of the considerations we're taking into consideration. But as far as sort of technical expertise and experience with projects of similar types and that sort of thing, both are in very good shape as far as that is. So there's no concerns on our part as far as the skills that they bring to bear. It's really about really the sort of finer points and the finances. So we're seeking some questions and answers around that, and hope to be able to get some feedback in the short term. I think the other thing that had been asked about is sort of where we sit from a financial standpoint. I have not spoken to the boosters at all about where they are in their fundraising. I think that well, one, I haven't had an opportunity to, and secondarily, I think it's an invitation I would suggest the school committee could make to the booster club to come and present, to talk through some of the ways in which they're fundraising and how they're fundraising. I think one thing to keep in mind, this is the point that was brought up by one of the public comments, is any gifts received by the district are at the discretion of the school committee. So gifts, donations, sponsorships, et cetera, are all at the description and discretion of the school committee. So that's one layer of control you guys have about what those are and what those aren't, and what you'll accept and what you won't accept. So I just want to clarify that for folks as far as any and all gifts or donations to the district in whatever form are ones. We don't generally turn them down, but you could. But I'm just saying, I mean, regardless, and we have, I would say, there have been times when people have suggested that they want to donate something to us, and we've politely said no, because it wasn't something that was really, as generous as it is, wasn't necessarily beneficial to the district. So I will say that. I think from the standpoint of just to give you a quick sort of frame of funding, we've got the $1.5 million that is a debt authorization. It's a portion to each of the 4 member communities based on our regional agreement relative to capital projects. And so it has to do, well, anyway, if you want to know the nuance of that, I can tell you it involves EQV and the year in which it was authorized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so in that circumstance, that's $1.5 million. And that number of $1.5 million was through our 4 towns meeting, which we have one coming up on the 16th of January, where we'll give a first blush of the fiscal 25 budget. But that $1.5 million was a number that was that the 4 towns gave feedback to the district and to the school committee that was an amount of debt authorization that they were comfortable with and could afford. We did subsequently, and have proposed CPA funding requests at each of the 4 communities. 2 have given us some. Amherst has given us an appropriated $957,500. Pelham back in 2020 did $11,500. And that was an initial ask of a smaller amount. And I think for the other 2 communities, Shutesbury, part of it's the history of when we first were asking, which fell in 2020 and COVID got in the way, and so we actually kind of pulled those back. So again, I think those are our potential source of funds still in the communities. We also had suggested to the towns if they had other sources besides regular, sort of debt payments to the district over time, if they had other, like free cash or ARPA funds, that they might want to commit those to the project, or just general, reserves. Amherst has committed $900,000 worth of reserves to the project, so Amherst has put in over $1,800,000 in just, here's cash, spend wisely relative to the project. And then, of course, their commitment from the standpoint of the debt authorization, which is paid out over a long period of time. We'll probably do a bond, and then put it in about a 20-year period of time, depending. Some things, sorry to drift a bit here, but when you borrow money, the term in which you can borrow it for is dependent on the useful life. So depending on what you do, so like if you do blacktop, you can like pavement, you often can only borrow for, say, 5 years, versus some things it's 10. You think of construction for like a building, it's like 20. So there are constraints within the law about how long you can borrow for. So in a project like a track, there's likely to be pieces that have to be borrowed for a shorter period versus a longer period, and that'll change the sort of layout of the repayment schedule. But long story short, sort of cash in hand, not any donations from any sources. There's about $3,369,000. That includes the $1.5 million from the debt authorization if we move ahead with it as it currently stands. There will be, there is time to continue to sort of work on and adjust those strategies for funding. This has always been a complex project because it was clear it was going to need multiple funding sources. The proposers basically will do the design work over the ensuing basically 12 months or so. There are advantages. This was actually something that came out in the interview process. When you bid projects makes a difference on what the price is. There's a lot of volatility in prices for these kind of projects. Some things have gone up considerably, they've come back down in some ways. So there's a, it is going to be difficult to know exactly how that's going to settle out over the next year. It may settle down. Some things are settling and returning to price points that are a little less problematic. Some aspects of projects like this are not. Case in point, some of the folks in this part of the state that have done projects recently. But when you bid that makes a difference. You often get better prices if you bid at the right time of year, which will be basically kind of January, February, which would be so we'll have to revisit the sort of funding structure because it'll make a difference as to what design choices we make. That'll be things we have to do in the fall. And I think that it will continue to be a complex and difficult process because it needs to be very public, and it is very public, and it's what the community wants, and that's often a complex conversation. And it'll depend on what funds we can have and make available. And the other key piece to put in mind is we can't go to bid with anyone without funds secured. That's a short story. And so we'll have to have either sort of cash in hand or authorization to borrow to enter into any contracts with anyone. We have sufficient funds to do design work without issue. But when we go into construction and bidding for construction, we'll have to be much more clear on where we sit with the overall funding and where it's coming from and how much and what kinds and that sort of thing.
All right. Roger?
Yeah, that all makes sense. And the design phase is, the completion of the design phase is 1 year away. The completion of design. When you tell the design firm, this is what we want. Design it, correct? And they'll tell you what's feasible. And the Conservation Commission and all of that is part of that process for the design firm, or do they just design and then the Conservation Commission sees it? Because the reason I'm asking that in that frame is there are a lot of concerns about what are the kids gonna be running on. The track, I got no issues, but the turf field or the natural grass field. Do you get to tell the design firm, we need a design for both?
Yes.
That's my question. I don't know what you tell them. This is new to me, so I would just prefer to ask you straight out.
I think that there will be, so there's a certain amount of work, regardless of what the field surface is, that will be required and will be the first sort of phases of the work that they do, which will involve some of the questions that need to be addressed relative to the Tan Brook and the wetlands that are nearby and some of that. So regardless of what you put on top of it, that's going to have to be part and parcel of that, and permitting and some of the conversations with Conservation Commission, et cetera. So there'll be a phase where that piece is a predominant component of it. And then, as I see it, we'll probably have them do, we won't have them do complete designs, because then they're doing we won't have them go to construction documents with two entirely different projects.
Right. I understand.
Otherwise, we're gonna have to pay for it twice, right? So, before we get to that, we'll have a layer of work that they'll do that will lay out, part of what the options look like, and frame that a little bit, and we'll have those community conversations about what we want as a community, and some of that will be, financial questions. Some of it will be about what's the need we're trying to solve, what meets that best. There's a whole host of interrelated topics that are going to happen, and that's probably the decision making around that is going to have to happen probably 6 months to 9 months from now, in that frame, I think, because then they'll need, if you want construction documents, that's going to take 3 months once they have a clear plan on what to do. So before we get to that point, we have to make some decisions about what our funding level is, the extent and scope of the project, because some of it, independent of the surface, there's a lot of talk about the sort of surface of the field, but there's a lot of other decisions we're going to have to make, and choices we, they always call it value engineering in the elementary project. It's basically how do you cut costs. There may be those kinds of trade-offs that we'll have to make some decisions about, because that'll impact sort of design and construction documents from that point. So if we want to be to a place where we're trying to get the timing right for construction to get the best pricing, which will be in the sort of January, February timeframe, you have to have construction documents before that, sort of work backward from there.
Right.
I guess it's in 6 to 9 months, we're gonna have to give a pretty specific set of choices to them, to say, we need this specific design.
Thank you. That's good. That helps.
I think Katie was next.
I just wanted to get clarification about the 12 months for design process, because in reading the proposals that were submitted, it was like closer to 6 to 9 months. So I'm confused where that 12-month timeline
Well,
comes from.
from today, which is almost December, till biddable documents is 12 months. That's where they're talking. And some of that has to do with when they can start, when they're able to start, for both firms. And so it's not that, they necessarily, it's some about it's when they can start and what pieces they can do in which timeframes. And some of it also depends on, when you talk about sort of permitting, when does COMCOM meet? When does it, what is the, if they only meet once a month and, you submit proposal and then you get feedback and you go back, some of that's what sets the time horizon for that. But some of it also is, again, if we're looking at, bidding in a time frame that's most advantageous to us, whether we finish, we could finish early, but we may want to sit on it until we can actually get the best bid, right? In other words, let's say we had a perfect design in September, it's the worst time of year to bid, maybe, I'm not sure. I do know that a better time to bid is like January, February, so we'll probably need that time to have the public conversations about it and to, secure the funding and all of those kinds of things. So, there'll be there's how long it takes them to do the work, and there's also how long it takes us to do our process, which is decision-making, fundraising.
Can they be
et cetera.
done simultaneously?
No, they're absolutely having simultaneously. There's no doubt about that. But
to
some are
expedite.
interdependent, and so some have to be in certain order versus the others. In other words, we're not going to ask them to do a full design until we have a clearer picture on what we want and what we can afford.
And then also, can you just share what the difference in the bids that have been put forward is? The difference in cost between the two?
So that's part of why we're seeking some additional information, because it was, there was clarification we needed about the prices that were listed. And I'd rather not until they give it, we give them an opportunity to kind of reply to that question. Because I don't want to advantage or disadvantage either one at this point, because we're seeking some additional information. So I think that would be just out of fairness to them. And again, it was a request for proposal with qualifications, so it's price is a factor, but not the entire factor. But again, that's part of why we're seeking some additional information, is to make sure we're understanding the approach they each took relative to how they priced what they priced.
All right, Anna?
Do you have an estimate of when you might have a cost estimate for option A, B, C, or whatever that we might be able to consider in 6 to 9 months?
It'll probably be 6 to 9 months. That's what I'm saying, is like we're going to get to a certain point. There's going to be a certain level of design they'll need to do, and part of that will be to frame the price of what those things cost. And so there's a certain amount of work they'll need to do to get to that point. That's likely to be 6 or 9 months from now. I'm not sure exactly. It'll depend a little bit on, there could be things that arise relative to conditions on the ground as they exist that change things significantly. So we could go out and do some soil sample testing and realize that, there's things we need to remediate in the soil. Or we might find in doing our work relative to the culvert of the Tan Brook that we need to replace the culvert. That's a much different project than if we can just leave the culvert as is and move ahead. So those things could have huge impact on price. And I don't know whether we would or we wouldn't. I mean, I think the general sense is that it's in good shape, but we're going to, literally one of the first things that's going to happen is we put the little camera on a little scooter that goes really down the pipe. Is going to be one of the first things that the designers are going to want to know about, because it gives us that sense firsthand of what that culvert looks like and what condition it's in, what it can tolerate, what it can't tolerate. So there's a lot of variability in that regard that could be significantly impacted. I think it's going to be in that 6 to 9 month range. We'll start to have a much clearer picture about totality of cost, some of which are like I say, independent of field surface, but not exclusively.
So what I'm trying to figure out is, how can we make sure that when it comes time to figure out what we can afford and what we can't afford and what the best project is, how can we not delay that decision because we have to take extra steps, because now we've made a decision that we have to do some additional work in order to make happen? For instance, if we don't have enough money, we have to go back and do a new debt authorization. And if we decide that we don't want to do turf and we want to do grass, then we have to do a new debt authorization. So is the likelihood that we will have to do a new debt authorization regardless of the process right now, if it's greater than 60%, is that something that we should be just starting right now because we don't want to delay this another year because we have to time it with the town committee's meetings. This has been such a long project. It has been 2 years, and we are not even close to even starting the project yet. If we have to then delay the project another cycle because we have to wait for another town committee meeting, now we're gonna be in 2026 or 2027 before we're using a new field. And I'm just wondering if there's something that we can do to make sure that when we get there, we're ready to go, as opposed to when we get there, we have to wait another year before we're ready to go. And then we have to wait another year because we haven't actually authorized the right amount of money because the costs keep escalating. So what can we do to make sure that we are in the best place possible to say go when we got the design?
So I think the short answer to that is fundraise. Because the short story is, we don't have enough money. And we also have directive from our 4 communities that have said, we can't borrow more money. So now, their opinion of that may have changed in the last little while, so we can bring that up as a topic at the 4 towns meeting to see, do you have, willingness and capacity to borrow more relative to this project? They may say they're okay with that, they may not. I mean, that's, we asked the select boards and finance committees of each of the 4 towns in town council in Amherst case, to weigh in on that, and to think about that, and that's gonna be a critical question. The thing is this, so we have a current authorization of $1.5 million, we can do a separate and additional authorization. So if which could be, it still has to have the, sort of appropriate descriptors, and so, but you can stack appropriations in that regard. So, so for example, with the middle school roof, we have an authorization for $3 million, which is also, just for broader perspective, other things that are in the queue that are also coming along that hit, and hit the finances of each of the 4 towns, and a commitment that they've all made, and we'll have to sort of, write the check for each year. And once you borrow the money, they're locked in. It's the full, sort of financial responsibility of the towns to pay that bill. And so that's a, those are the other pieces that play into this. But you can have, 2 different authorizations that fund a project. So like middle school roof may be a circumstance where, because again, when we started doing this, they were, replacing 25-year-old roofs, and each year they said, oh, we're doing 26-year-old roofs, now we're doing 27-year, they've kind of moved the goalpost on us. Prices haven't gotten less expensive, the need for repair has gotten more expensive, so we're probably gonna have to go back to the towns and get an additional authorization. We won't rescind the one and get another one, we'll take the one we've got and add to it. So we can do that in this project as well, if towns are able and willing to do an additional authorization. Clearly, fundraising of any sort is welcome. And of course, other non-borrowing authorizations of money from any of the 4 communities is welcome as well. So it's, any and all opportunities to sort of put actual dollars formally committed to the project, or, the sooner the better. But I think that, like I've said before, we generally try to align our debt authorizations with communities to match up with town meetings, because that's a courtesy. It's not a requirement, but it's a courtesy, and it is one of those things, especially given, the advice we've gotten from the communities about what their ability to pay for this kind of debt is, we'd want to be in sync with that as well. Again, not explicitly required, but, if a community was not able, let's say we wanted to do $5 million, debt authorization, I'm not suggesting we do that, I'm picking a random number. There can be, 3 of the communities might be really okay with that, but a 4th one might not, and to have them have to call a town meeting is something they can do. They may feel that's worthwhile for this, that amount of money, so there's that balancing act too. There's nothing that prevents the town from calling a special town meeting. It's just not a very easy process, so we want to be cooperative as we go through this to work in concert with them around all of these things, you know. So, you know, I think they're, you know, the best we can do is keep asking questions and sort of keep, you know, attuned to what we can and can't do and when we can and can't do and you know, what the communities can and can't afford and what they want to spend their money on and what they don't want to spend their money on.
Tillman?
So I understand that we have to wait for the site assessment to know the details of what specific design we could use, but I feel, and how much it's going to cost then, but I feel that there's one fundamental question that will take much more discussion, which is the question of turf versus artificial turf versus grass. And I'm concerned that when the decision originally was made, that since then a lot of new discoveries have been made about artificial turf, and we have heard some of the concerns there. And I think there's also strong opinions by the proponents for artificial turf, why they think it's the right decision. And I'm a little concerned that if we're waiting to discuss that specific question, we're going to have a long discussion when that comes up. And so we should maybe have that sooner so that we can exclude a large number of the options depending on what we decide there, which may have nothing to do with the cost of the option. But it's not something we can delay, because this will exactly lead to that problem that we'll then have eternal discussions with the towns. Because my understanding is that the towns do care about what that option is, and depending on that, feel if they want to contribute with different types of funds.
Yeah.
And I feel we're stalling on that important question. That question does not require that the consultants go out and find out, you know, what the Tenbrook looks like.
No, and I think let me state this. So when we interviewed the two, you know, the two proposers, you know, that was a critical question. It's like, how do you approach this? And they've been in communities where they've you know, built artificial surfaces. They've been in communities where they built natural grass surfaces. There's ones where they've done some combination of the two, depending on, you know, the nature of the size of the project, and they decided to do artificial in some spots and natural in some other spots, et cetera, et cetera. So they have experience in that, and that was one of the critical questions: is how do you go about that public dialogue and having that conversation to get at what the communities, plural, really want. So I think once we select, you know, a firm, you know, we'll give them that direction and start that conversation sooner than later, because we need to, because I think that's not a point lost on us, and so I think, you know, that can happen simultaneously, because some of that conversation, you know, around you know, that surface, different options relative to that surface, you know, risks, et cetera, are like you say, ones that can happen essentially now and should be starting to happen now. I mean, they've been happening loosely in the public realm over the last couple of years. I think that, you know, to have a more structured approach to that is you know, a direction we definitely want both of those firms to do, and they're ready and able to do that. And you know, the thing I would suggest is that both firms are clear that it's what the community wants. It's like, but let's make a decision based on the totality of things that matter to you as a community, right? And what are the things that are in the sort of current development of these different kinds of fields, and that's natural surfaces as well as artificial ones. What are the, you know, what's the current status of those? What are the different products that are available? You know, what are you know, the characteristics of those, what they can and can't do, et cetera, all sorts of things that can be happening now and can be part of that initial process. So that can be stuff that we direct them to do as part of the early phases of this.
Yes. It's great that the consultants, the firms will have those conversations. I feel they should also be done here without them long before they even start. It's great that they're going to engage the community, but I think, you know, there's strong opinions already everywhere on this.
Well,
and you know, I feel we should have conversations about this here, not now, but soon, and not wait,
Yeah, I mean,
8 months until we.
No, I think that's absolutely, I think you're already having those conversations. I mean, just by virtue of the conversation tonight, we've had that to some extent in different ways. And I think that that's perfectly fine. It's your agenda. And so it's really for you guys to discuss how you want to frame that conversation in a way that gets to the question you want answered.
One sentence. We've only talked about process. We have not talked about substance here.
Yeah. No, I'm saying that that's absolutely perfectly fine and within your purview to do that. And I think the advantage of leveraging these firms is that they have gone through that process so that it can be constructive to have those conversations in a meaningful way about that. I think that's an advantage they bring, because it takes away sort of my point of view or a particular moderator's point of view, because they're interested in and their perspective is going to be driven around finding out what the community can and can't or will or won't afford, choose, like, dislike, etc.
Gabriella? So I was going to bring up a similar point, and so I'll piggyback on that. The RFP that we saw at the October 3rd meeting had options 1A, 1B, 2, and 3. 1A and 1B were listed as grass, 2 listed as grass, and 3 being the same design as 2 listed as artificial turf. So when these companies sent you the proposals in response to that RFP, did they actually address all 4 of these design possibilities? Did they provide options in both grass and turf in their pricing? Is that not in there?
No, I think it's too early. I think those were illustrative only.
Okay.
To say here's the status of where we've come to date relative to trying to get a sense of scale and orientation and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so that brings me to the point you had made earlier, and that is, currently we were discussing, is that this conversation really still needs to happen, right? And it's my understanding that this body, or this combination of bodies, made a decision in the past that semi-locked us into the artificial turf. And in order for this conversation to take place, I think we need to rescind that commitment that we made and make it so that we are still in a position to be able to make that choice, based on some process of public input and school committee decisions and contributions from the design firm. I am not sure why that. I realize it has something to do with the debt authorization, perhaps, but I feel like that decision was made prematurely. A lot more information has been provided about grass versus turf, and we don't even have all of the information that we're going to have from the designs to really make a decision on grass versus turf. So I would like to propose that we, at the very least, rescind the previous commitment to turf and leave ourselves open for a conversation about whether it's going to be grass or turf going forward.
Jennifer, I think you had your hand up next.
I support that idea. I support the idea of rescinding the previous motion that was made in March of 2022. I think I'm the only person who was part of the school, who is still here, who was part of the school committee at that time. Sarah Bess, thank you. You were here too. I'm so sorry. I apologize. I'm so sorry. You and I were the only ones. And so my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Doug, as finance director, first came to us with a motion that did not prescribe artificial turf for that debt authorization, and the body, the regional school committee at the time, decided and approved a motion to specifically limit the project to artificial turf. So I agree with Gabriella about rescinding that motion and then re-voting a new motion that does not prescribe the material for the field so that we are open to all options. Because what I'm hearing is that people are interested in having a community conversation about this topic, about artificial turf versus natural grass. And to Gabrielle's point, even if magically that happened, has happened already, and even if hypothetically we were to decide now to pivot to natural grass, we couldn't do it with the current debt authorization. So I like to think of it as like setting ourselves up for success. How can we best set ourselves up for success? And that, to me, means having all options on the table. So I support that idea. I actually wanted to suggest that perhaps at our next meeting, Doug could come back with because I know that the language of the motion has to be really specific. Perhaps Doug could come back with the language of, we can look up what it takes to rescind a motion, but the language of what a potential new motion could be for the body to discuss and deliberate and to get public comment on at our next regional school committee meeting. So thank you for that idea. I support that idea.
So we need specific language to rescind?
No, we probably do want to just like look up what's the appropriate language to rescind a motion, but then the replacement motion that would include all options or that wouldn't be specific to artificial turf has some specifics that it needs to have in it that last time Doug gave us the wording for. Mm-hmm. So, okay, but I also have a question for Doug, going back to something you said earlier about the school committee approves all gifts to the district, which of course I know is true because we sometimes approve gifts in our meetings. But in this case, since the boosters, which I assume is a private 501c3, they're doing fundraising and they're raising funds for the track. If hypothetically a corporate entity donated money to the boosters and then the boosters allocated it for the track, would we be approving a gift from the boosters or would we be approving a gift from that corporate entity, hypothetically?
Well, you technically approve it from the boosters because they're the ones that's actually writing the check to you. However, how you evaluate whether to accept that gift is up to you, and what criteria you choose to use is up to you. So if you have knowledge, comfort, or discomfort relative to that it influences your vote, then you're welcome to do that.
And if they, again, hypothetically, if the boosters were to make a gift of a lump sum, and we were aware that a portion of it came from a corporate entity, would we be able to like approve part of the gift, but not another part? Okay, that sounds complicated.
Yeah, well, the only way you might be able to do that, and I'm not 100% certain on this, but the only way is if they donated it, allowing you to accept part of it, which would be very unusual.
If the boosters donated it that way.
Right,
okay.
where it gave you options within the donation to select.
Right.
You could, but I don't think we've ever seen that, and I doubt that would ever happen.
Okay.
So I wouldn't want to promise that that's possible. It would get really sticky really quick. But yeah, so anytime anyone gives you any money, it's a consideration. If you're uncomfortable with how they acquired that money that they give to you, that's a factor you can consider in accepting a gift. You're under no obligation to accept any gift.
So I will say when we wrote our original motion, however long ago that was, part of the reason we wrote it as specifically as we did was to allow the boosters to fundraise as they have been, because they needed very specific parameters so they could source their funding. So it wasn't, to my recollection, it was the best way for us to help the boosters do their fundraising was to be as specific as possible.
Yeah, so going back to design, beyond the orientation and surface, so our track is an extension of our school. Its design should reflect the needs of our students and our identity as a whole. So my question is, what form will public input take regarding the design decisions, particularly student input?
It's a great question. So I think that's also part and parcel of let me get closer to the mic so they can actually hear my voice. So, we've talked mostly or extensively about sort of surface of the field, but other aspects of the design are all part and parcel of, what a design firm would bring forward to have reviewed by the school committee and have potentially public forums about. And so if there were aspects of that that were problematic for folks, or things that they wanted to see or that they cared about, that they wanted to really advocate strongly for or against, those public forums. I mean, like we've had this evening, a lot of conversation around the surface of the interior field, but there are many other aspects that could be something that matter a lot to people or not matter as, so there's questions of what other amenities. If it's critical that we have, bathrooms adjacent, not, as a part of that. And it's something that, some people care very deeply about, that is a much different design than not necessarily having those. And it's, that's a cost that's going to be incurred in the design that, might not be there. So if that's those kinds of things and those kind of impacts that are part of the project as a whole are critical, feedback is part of that design process. So as they bring things forward, if there are things that any group wants to advocate for, being at those forum meetings and those conversations publicly about it to press that point is important.
And those public conversations, do you refer to meetings such as this, or?
Yeah, it'll probably be more, traditionally what's happened a lot in these kind of circumstances, it's more of there's a number of different ways they can happen. They can be, this kind of roundtable type thing. Oftentimes they'll be, depending, they can be circumstances where they'll have a series of sort of, visual representations of possible designs and solicit feedback. And, there's a lot of different ways people can, I've been in meetings like that where people literally put, colored stickers that they like more is green, and if they like less is red, and they mark things, and they sort of take a straw poll of the people that came about what they like or dislike. They'll have feedback forums sometimes about things. So there's a number of different ways it can be approached to solicit that feedback from folks. And that's part of the conversation with this group too, is like, how do you want to solicit that feedback? Because there are things we could do, we could have, designs on the website and offer a period of time in which people can provide, feedback about, I want a maroon track and not a black track, or I want to, whatever it is, it's like, I want school colors alternating stripes. I mean, there may be some limitations by virtue of, we want to be compliant with like MIAA so that we can host track meets. But we're going to be ADA compliant, so the way in which we do that work is going to be, prescribed by law and that sort of thing. But there are a lot of other ways in which, people may want to weigh in, and there may be ways that they think, or aspects they think are really critically important, and so there's a number of ways to gather that feedback. And so I think, again, the expertise of these firms that have done this a few times, have a number of different approaches they've taken, and we can offer suggestion about what we think that should look like. So we can influence, they don't get to dictate to us, they work for us, right? So we can tell them, it's like, well, we want a form that looks like this. I think in our proposal, it's, we said the number, but not the structure of those kind of meetings. So there will be opportunity. Is it long
Come
story
tell
short?
us.
Yeah, so I encourage that that we make the feedback, the accessibility for giving feedback, more accessible for students.
So you email the school committee or for public comment, or just for us right here, the people that are sitting here, email us. You can come and say something. You can email us individually. So, the student feedback is really important, right? Like the student athletes, you guys are the ones that are going to be using it. So what will work for you, you will know best, right? You guys are the ones who go have track meets or play football or soccer or whatever other number of sports will be used by that field and track surface. So come tell us. We want to know. I want to know. Gabriella?
Actually, in response to this suggestion, I think that part of the process that we undergo in discussing the design, we really should make the effort to reach out to the students as opposed to saying, hey, you know, come and email us. And yes, everybody's always welcome to email us or come to the school committee meetings, but that's an effort for them to reach out to us. We really are interested in that feedback, so that process should include something that goes to the students where they are and in a way that you know is easy for them to be involved in the process, as well as the general public.
Absolutely. Jennifer?
Sarah Bass, earlier you described the conditions or how we got to the previous motion that we voted on in March of 22. My recollection is that we were informed by the boosters that they required artificial turf to be the only option in order to do their fundraising. So there obviously are strong feelings both for and strong beliefs both for and against artificial turf. We also had the Pelham CPA, which declined to fund artificial turf in this project. So strong feelings on both sides. And we as decision makers should, of course, take in all the input and opinions that we can, but we shouldn't lock ourselves into a decision because of that. We shouldn't feel like we're locked into a decision because of one person or one group's feelings or opinions. And the next thing I wanted to say, just again regarding timing and setting ourselves up for success. So March of 22 was when we voted on that motion, and I think Doug is saying that like the earliest the field could be completed would be 2026. So that's like one student's whole high school career, continuing to play on a subpar field. And let's also remember that we call this the track and field project, and it's the track and the field. The field material is what's bringing up the most public input and debate. But the track is tied up with that too, and our track is currently in very bad condition, as we've heard. So the track and field student athletes are caught up in this. And if we get to the point where, to Anna's point earlier, we determine we don't have the funding and then we have to wait and do new debt authorizations, and if that gets pushed to 27, then that's another student's whole high school career. So again, I'm thinking about setting ourselves up for success and making sure as many options as possible are open to us so that we can move forward and do what we think is best for the district.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Taking into consideration what everyone has said and to move things along, I will make a motion, and I've not yet made a motion to rescind, so feel free to chime in and correct me. But I move to rescind the decision made in March 2022 by the former regional school committee so that options 1A, 1B, 2, and 3 as outlined in the RFP be considered going forward.
Second.
A second.
Yep. Doug?
Without, and I'm saying this purely from the standpoint of I don't know the answer, but I wouldn't want you to take an action that you'll have to take again. In other words, if there's formal and specific language to rescind an authorization, which I think there might be, but I'm not 100% certain, then you may want to wait until your next meeting, and I can find and present that language to you.
As I understood, it was the language to, like, we can rescind now and then develop language for the new.
What I'm saying is that the language for rescinding a debt authorization may be specific as well. So it's not as simple as like I rescind the vote. It may be. I don't know for certain off the top of my head. So I wouldn't want you to necessarily take that step and then find out that was not appropriate. It could be problematic in other ways, which it's just cautionary, I guess, is what I would
I guess we could
suggest.
do it again if we need to do it again with the new language.
Shulman?
I mean, in full spirit with your intent, and I would love to see that we open up our options to everything, as you discussed. I do agree with Doug that I'm a little worried about doing an ad hoc motion that we don't understand. And number two is, I would feel much more comfortable to rescind whatever we're gonna do if we had exact information from the boosters, what they have achieved so far. Reading the minutes from that March meeting, it seemed like that option 3 was really important for the purpose of fundraising. It's repeated many times in there. And if the answer is that fundraising has not been successful, then we don't need to worry about it. Now, on the other hand, if the fundraisers come back and say, yes, we can afford everything that we ever wanted and buy a product that's healthy and, whatever, if you do I don't know what the noun for rescinding is. If we do that now, we may run into a problem. So I would just ask that we may be delayed until the next meeting before acting on that.
So, thank you. And I just want to point out that I had emailed both Doug and Sarah Bess for the booster amount for tonight's meeting to have these discussions to move things along. And again, we're stalling. So, do you have the update?
I take offense at that remark, quite frankly.
Tell
I
me.
really do. You say I'm stalling. I take offense at that because I tell you what, I got to work at 5:30 this morning. I get to work at 5:30 or 6 o'clock every morning and work till 6 or 7 o'clock at night. I'm not stalling. I don't have opportunity to find out the answer to those questions.
Sarah Bess might have it. I don't know. It's true. It's not just you, Doug.
I did reach out to them and I haven't heard back. So I also think we need to pause on this. I will reach out to the boosters, see if they can come and talk to us. But as Tillman said, I would be, and Doug, I don't want to do something that we can't undo and have it be more messy rather than just pausing, because 2 weeks isn't going to make a difference at this point.
Thank you all.
Anna?
I reached out to Mary of the boosters, and Mary wrote me back and said, the turf committee is meeting again this Monday at 5:30. I will be able to provide you with more details on Tuesday or Wednesday. And that was November 17th. She has not reached out to give me the information. So what I would say is she has the information and she can provide it to us, and I suggest that we invite her to the meeting next week and ask her to present what she has in hand next week.
Yep. Gabriella?
Two things. One is that I agree with all the reasons for waiting on how we move forward on this motion. But we probably need to undo the motion that got made because it was made and seconded.
I think we can just vote it down.
We can just vote it down.
Actually, I would.
Oh, yep, go ahead.
I would make a motion to table it, which means it's still alive, and we just put it on hold, which means that we can reconsider it at a future time, which I think would show our intent to discuss it soon, rather than voting it down and making it disappear.
Okay. Sounds good.
I can, yep.
Yeah, I think it just needs to be clear that this committee is interested in discussing the options going forward.
And
Katie?
just for the record, could you repeat what the clarifying information is that we are seeking so that we can go forward with the motion?
I don't know you're asking.
I think, so what I'll suggest is this, I'll confirm if it requires specific language for the motion. I'll make sure to find that language and make sure that it's available to us. In other words, we may have to be specific about, the date in which we approved it before and the amount we approved it before and the criteria. Those things may all be part of the motion, so I'll get the motion language for rescinding the debt authorization. Sometimes we do debt authorizations and there's a series of components within that. This doesn't have quite as many components to it. And so if you were to rescind parts of that, it has you have to name it specifically, and so I can get that specific language that's necessary to rescind it. It may be as simple as what you suggested. It may be a little more specifically, like the date it was originally authorized, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'll just confirm what that language explicitly needs to be.
And I'm wondering if we rescind it, do we have to have something immediately to replace it, like other language? Since there is a debt authorization, I don't know if some language needs to be in place, or we can just rescind what we had.
You're under no obligation to authorize debt at any time, so
Okay.
you're not explicitly required to.
Got it.
But it does, you know, and just talking about a new debt authorization, there's a series of notifications we have to do and opportunities for the towns to weigh in that you know, the sort of clock starts when you make that motion, and it's and so the timing of a new authorization is important as well. Because if you were to, you know, like let's say on the 12th, you authorized another $1.5 million, there's a 60-day clock that starts on the 12th. Okay. And if they're not going to call a town meeting within 60 days.
So,
you know,
and that goes
that,
to Anna's point
right.
earlier, that we can perhaps rescind in one step and authorize in a different meeting, but we want to be clear on what that's putting in place. Okay.
But
thanks.
I think the other, more broadly, I think the other thing to keep in mind, and it may not be as critical, I mean, I think it's critical in your conversation around this, is that with no debt authorization, there's no money available, right? And so, you know, and that may be fine. I mean, there's rationale to waiting so that it times up with town meetings and that sort of thing, but there's really literally no money from a debt standpoint that the district and the 4 towns are committing to the project. That may have a chilling effect on either the communities or the town or donors that might be interested in donating. You know, it seems like, well, it's less sure than it was before because there's zero debt authorized now. I'm not saying that will or won't have an effect. It may not have a material effect. I'm just saying it's a consideration. You know, but you can also state your position about where you are relative to a new authorization and the fact that the timing of it's et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to oversell that point. I just want to make sure that eyes wide open about what is and is not truly available and on the books relative to
So I guess a point of order, would it be possible to simply amend the previous motion so that it still carries the debt authorization, but the wording is amended? And could we be provided, I know it's somewhere in the minutes way back when, but could we be provided with the wording of the original motion as we go forward in discussing this?
I think Jennifer was next.
This is very complicated, and I appreciate all the discussion about this. Shoot. So, okay, so first, to Gabriella's point, a motion has been made and seconded, and I've heard people speaking for and against the motion and for and against tabling it. I disagree that we should just vote it down. I think we should vote on it, and or vote on. I lost track of where we are right now. But like, I don't think we've agreed that we're all going to vote it down. I think we should each vote the way that we think is right. The idea that we would rescind and then not have a replacement motion at the ready, whether it's this week or this meeting or the next meeting. I'm just thinking out loud here. Like we want to show the community that we're committed to this project, and to Doug's point, we want to make sure everyone knows we are very committed to this project. It's just the details of what the project is and how we're going to fund it and how we're going to get there that all of this process stuff has to do with. So, I guess I would suggest that whenever we do rescind it, if we rescind it, if we don't have a replacement motion at the ready, that we then somehow vote to request that the superintendent develop a plan to develop to have a replacement motion that includes the plan of when does the 60-day clock start and when will the Springtown meetings happen, et cetera, so that we're clear with the community that we're very committed to this project. I think that's all I wanted to say for now.
Thank you. Anna?
I just wanted to point out that the school committee does not approve the debt authorization. We have to create a debt request for the town committees to authorize. So if we rescind our debt authorization, we have no money. We have to go back to the towns and say, please approve this new debt request. The entire debate goes back into the towns and we have to argue for it a second time. It may be easier this time without the specification for one particular SURF. It may be harder. We don't really know at this point. We are taking a risk by rescinding the debt authorization and asking for a new one, because there is no guarantee that it will pass. However, if we have to rescind the debt authorization in the future, and then we have to start that process in a year, that just puts us way further behind in the thing. My question is, if we rescind the debt authorization, can we pay the contractors who are designing this? Can we actually get the design?
So, so two things. Technically, you guys do authorize the debt. The towns have a right of refusal.
Oh.
So if they take no action, it's approved.
Oh.
Which is, we generally, that's why I say you could, if we had a debt, you can do a debt authorization at any time. It just proves to be really inconvenient if they choose to want to oppose it or approve of it. But if they take no action, it is approved. So you do have that authority. I lost track of where I was on the other question that you asked. Sorry.
Can we pay
for the designer?
The town of Amherst has dedicated, and the town of Pelham have dedicated over $1.8 million, which is more than the cost of design.
Tillman?
I'm worried that we're moving too fast. Since this involves the towns and other entities, therefore I really recommend that we vote to table the motion, which keeps it alive, allows us to vote and show that we're sincere about continuing discussing this, but it gives us time to get more input and make a good decision.
Roger.
It's interesting that we talk about, rescinding, the debt and so forth. But the real question is not about the track. It's about the field that's inside the track. That's really what we're talking about. And that's why I asked the question early on in this discussion, is the design team doing X? Is it, and Doug answered that quite well. Well, they have experience in this, and then maybe the culvert we have to do something to. So we have all of that. So my point is that the design team can do what is necessary in terms of design, and in fact, as part of the process, we can say, we're not sure what kind of field we have, so please build that into your idea. And Doug said clearly that you don't want them to come up with two designs, but as they design it, I think about crowning the field and this and that, and there's some basic things that are going to be the same. What's going to be underneath? And so I don't think we have to necessarily do all of this. And even if the boosters said one thing, that was 2 years ago. We know about PFAS a lot more now than we did 2 years ago. And if they are boosters, and I really believe they are, I think of the lights that are there on the baseball and football field, they are boosters. And they will see that this body is not only interested in making sure that we're MIAA compliant and we can have home track meets and we can sit on the hill and watch the students, do their best, but also we want to keep them safe. And that's really what we're talking about. That's really what we're talking about. And like Doug's saying, well, what color the lane's going to be on the track? That was that to me made me laugh, because that's one of the things that could be fun. But the point being, it really is important that we do believe that we need a new track. We do need a reorientation. And we do need some kind of plan on the field that we're going to have. And that's what's really important. And the design, which is still 6 months out, as we talk about it, we might decide in 3 months, it's really got to be, and I'm not going to say either one or the other. And then design team, this is the one we really want, so focus on that. Because the size of the field is going to be pretty much the same. There's a whole bunch of things that are going to be the same no matter what. That's all.
William?
I just have a question. Since this committee previously, 2 years ago or whenever it was, made the decision or passed the motion it was going to be turf, can we just in 3 months say, oh, we want grass now? I don't think we have that ability to currently, because we already made a decision. I don't know. Could someone clarify that?
What are we talking about?
That is a really good question, and I do not know the answer. I don't.
Because I feel like we're saying that we're going to have community input, but why are we having community input if we can't even change the decision without rescinding it?
That was the point that
Right, like I don't.
that I had brought up earlier. Yeah.
You know, I don't understand how we're
having
saying we're
to-
going to have community input when there's already been a decision made. And then
Which is why we needed to change that. Yeah.
And my other question is, in the two design firms, are they the ones that are going to be doing the community input piece? Or is it going to be organized by us? Like, who's organizing the outreach to the students, or the outreach to the athletes, or the outreach to the families? Like, who is doing that piece?
Well, there's nothing prevents the regional school committee from their own action within that. And there may be others that, you know, and there's certainly, by virtue of who we've heard from in the past, that, you know, mobilize to provide public comment and that sort of thing. But it's certainly a component of what we're going to ask our design firms to be a part of.
So are they going to organize it, or are they just going to come to those gatherings?
No. I think that there's certainly, like I said earlier, it's not a fixed thing at this point. So how much, you know, they may have very specific suggestions about what works well to have a conversation that's productive, because they've had a number of these community kinds of meetings, and at the same time, I think we give a lot of direction relative to that. So I think it's a cooperative process to figure out how to do that. And there's nothing prevents, you know, regional school committee can have a forum about anything anytime it wants. But I think this is an area where we want to leverage some expertise that they have in these kind of circumstances to have these kind of meetings and solicit that feedback from the community in a way that's ultimately constructive for informing your decision.
And then is it really an authentic conversation if we don't rescind the motion that we already made? I mean, I feel like we're just trying to appease people. If we're actually going to have the conversations, we need to allow it to actually make a difference. And without rescinding that motion, I don't see how it can actually make a difference.
Tillman?
So the motion that was voted on was to authorize the debt. It doesn't say anything that the field has to be one way or another. If you come up with different money, you could.
It does, I think.
If you want to use that money. Right? Okay, let me. If I have to go back to my town and explain that we're changing this, the way I would like to do it is to say, we're changing the motion. You previously authorized X amount. We're now changing the language a little bit to make it broader, and I'm asking you to reauthorize that same amount, or maybe a slightly different amount because things have changed, roughly at the same time. What I want to avoid is that we rescind this now. All the money that we have kind of committed goes back to the towns. They decide that it's actually more important that they build a new fire station or something else. And then when we come back in 2 months after we finally come around to figuring out what we want to, what we want to authorize the second time around, they say, well, sorry, the money is gone. That is the reason why I'm not in favor of taking an action right now, because I want to understand the timing better so that we can have the new authorization triggered at the right moment for the town meetings to approve with the argument that I just explained.
Anna?
I have a question about something that you said. Oh, now I just forgot what I was going to ask. Okay, sorry,
That's okay.
totally forgot.
Doug.
I looked up so the state produces things called IGR, which are instructional guideline release, I think is the name of it. But I looked up borrowing authorization, rescission, or reduction. Municipal district or bond council should be consulted about warrant articles and legislative body votes to rescind or reduce borrowing authorization. So the general advice is go to your bond council. So we hire, separate from our usual legal sort of group, there are people that specialized in the realm of borrowing and debt and bonds. And so we would go back to them and get official language relative to rescinding the vote, which is probably fairly straightforward, given that it's not like I said, oftentimes when we borrow or do debt authorizations, it'll have a laundry list of 12 or 15 items on it. So when you want to rescind a particular component of that, it's a little different and maybe more involved in the language that you need. Given that this was a standalone authorization, it might be much more simplistic, but it's worth checking with bond counsel before taking an actual rescission vote to have it be formal and official.
William?
Could you ask if it could be amended instead of rescinded? Okay.
So I'm going to make a motion that we table the motion.
Second.
Thank you.
Can I make a friendly amendment?
Yep.
That we table it until the next regional school committee on December 12th, I believe?
I am going to say no, because I want to make sure we are able to hear from the boosters before we make that decision.
Sorry.
Yep, go ahead, Tillman.
We could table it again at that meeting. No, I'm just saying it would make sure that it appears on the agenda.
So Sarah Beth, can I clarify?
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting you want to hear from the boosters at that meeting, December 13th meeting?
I'm going to try to get the boosters to come as soon as I can, but I can't do that right now. So if it is something that can be on the agenda for that meeting, then great, and we can talk about it more then. But I don't want to limit ourselves without being able to hear from them first. Jennifer?
I'm speaking to the motion to table.
Okay.
Okay. I don't think we need to, I would like to get an update from the boosters. That would be great. I don't think we need to get an update from them before we decide whether or not to rescind the motion. Because even though we may not be doing these all in one meeting, we're rescinding and then we're planning to approve another motion that's more broad. So we're not taking anything off the table with this rescinding. We're saying we want to open it up. We want the replacement motion to open it up to more options. So, I mean, even if the boosters were it doesn't matter. To me, it doesn't matter what their level of fundraising is. Even if they did come and say, we've raised $2 million and we can do whatever we want, I still think we should rescind the motion so that we can have the discussions that I've heard members say and that I've heard students say that we want to have. So, I'm not going to vote in favor of tabling the motion.
there any other discussion? Okay, so all in favor of, yep.
Can
Do
you
you
just
have-
repeat? You're not doing the friendly amendment, correct?
No,
Okay. So if you could just repeat what we're
so
voting on.
I am just tabling the motion.
Tabling it indefinitely?
Yep. All right, all in favor of tabling the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4. All against tabling the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4.
No, no.
Fails.
So it fails. So
I would like to make a
Anna.
motion to table the motion until the next meeting, December 12th. At which point, we can retable it if we don't have the information that we're looking for.
is that our next meeting day?
12th, yes.
Okay.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of tabling the motion until our next meeting on 12/12? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All against? All right, so our motion is tabled until our next meeting, 12/12. All right.
Before we move on, Sarah Beth, if I can just apologize to you as well as to Doug for my choice of words. I did not mean to suggest you're stalling. I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Point of order. Could we take a 5-minute break?
Yes. All right, so 5-minute break and we'll come back in 5. how about an update on the Arms principal search?
I will let you know how that goes. So, and I didn't post this till this afternoon. I didn't think it was terribly hard to wrap your head around because it's pretty straightforward, the process. But basically, we'll post the position in early January, leave it open and solicit applications from folks through beginning of February. That second line where it says deadline for submitting name for interview committee, we'll solicit a variety of folks for doing the interviews. Two middle school parent guardians, 2 middle school faculty and staff members, 1 school committee member. Then we'll go with human resources administrator, student services director, director of student and family engagement, and the curriculum administrator. So fairly intensive group of central office administrators are involved because they're going to interact pretty significantly with the principal that we hire. But we also want to get on that interview committee a good sense of our community, both from the faculty that work for and with this principal, and then also the families that are having children in that building. So we'll solicit, and we'll do an outreach process, in January. We won't do it yet. Part of waiting until January is with the end of the year, start of the year, various holiday celebrations, et cetera, that happen. It will be more of an opportunity to actually have people's attention for a moment to figure out and submit their name, and we pose a couple of questions when we do that, as to why they're interested in serving on this on this interview committee. Once we've got that group together, they'll do the interview of candidates, and then they'll interview a broader set, narrow it to us. So this will parallel in some structures the superintendent search. You'll do a sort of broad set of interviews, and then you'll have some finalists. Those finalists will then meet the community. So they'll meet, and that Arms Community Forums with finalists is a sort of multi-part process. They'll meet with sort of faculty and staff. Then they'll also have a sort of public forum where they can meet with families and answer questions and present some of their point of view and that sort of thing. We'll try to do that around the first week of March. And then over the ensuing weeks, and you probably wonder why does it take 2 weeks to actually pick somebody, and some of that's because we do things like extensive criminal records checks and reference checking and some of that sort of stuff that sometimes takes a while to do, and it's not your sort of run-of-the-mill kind of checking that we do in that process. So that's part of why it takes a little bit between that series of community forums and an announcement of appointment, because it is a process by which we do that deep dive into some of the references and criminal records and all of those kinds of things, and then we also negotiate a contract with them. So we also have a conversation about what compensation, because we may pick somebody we think they're wonderful and they want twice as much money as we have, and so then it's like, oh well, then now we have to sort of reset our point of view here a little bit. So that's a broad timeline. So essentially, hopefully around the middle of March. I mean, none of these are hard and fast deadlines. I mean, that's what we'd like it to be. There may be things around people's travel, weather, et cetera, that impact this, our ability to schedule the forums, other things going on like school committee meetings and whatever else. But that's a broad sort of sketch of how this process happens. Generally with our principal appointments, and we try to have a fairly public process on certain aspects of this, which is different than if we were to hire a teacher or something like that, because of the nature of the work and the need to be interacting with the community at large. And so I'll entertain any questions people have about that process and that timeline.
Are there any questions? Jennifer?
Thank you for the update, Doug. The timeline looks straightforward. I guess I have some suggestions, because I realize this is a position that the school committee doesn't approve and have really any oversight over. But so here are my suggestions. To make the search process as open, not open, well, as open and transparent as possible, by which I mean in the past, there's been a little bit of secrecy around membership of the search committee, so hopefully the membership on the search committee can be made public. And then I also wanted to suggest that, so, okay, sorry, you rattled off the membership on the committee. So you said 2 ARMS parents, 2 ARMS faculty or staff, 1 school committee member, and then who are the other 3?
Human Resources Administrator. Student Services Director. Director of Student and Family Engagement. Curriculum Administrator. So
Great.
if you want to name names, I will name those as Student Services Director is Faye Brady. Director of Student and Family Engagement is Marta Guevara. Curriculum Administrator is Mary Kiley.
And the HR administrator?
It'll be one of 2 people. It will either be Jen Ortiz or Jadira Torres Manzano.
Gotcha. That's great. My next suggestion about, I think that list of members sounds good and representative. Just to keep in mind as you're choosing members, to keep in mind other forms of diversity in terms of racial diversity, LGBTQ representation, and other diverse groups to try to have on the, it sounds like from some of those names you have some racial diversity already at least. And then, so I guess I have 2 questions. Who will choose the candidates to be interviewed? Will the search committee choose those, or will they be given a number of candidates to interview? And then who is the ultimate decision maker? Which I think I know the answer to, but.
I'll answer the last one first. Technically, the superintendent, that's a cooperative decision though, so I'm not gonna just throw a dart at a dartboard kind of
Sure.
thing. You know, I'll be, you know, at the community forums and seeing those responses. I'll read through, you know, all the input that people provide relative to feedback, you know, and be in conversation with all of the interview committee, looking through all of their recommendations and responses relative to their interviews. But ultimately, yes, the decision's mine in this role. As far as a search committee, it'll depend on how many applicants we get. You know, if we get 50 applicants, then we might need to form a selection committee versus if we get 5, right? So it kind of depends on this. So let me just sort of back up and talk through this a little bit. So in our current process we've used over the last few years, we typically have a selection committee and an interview committee. And critical aspects of a selection committee are, you know, training in how to eliminate bias. I'm now drawing a blank on the term.
Like hidden bias.
Thank you for the word. I couldn't think of the word implicit at this point. Trying to take implicit bias out. So there's certain training we do around selection committee membership, and besides sort of an awareness of potential implicit bias and trying to avoid that, also is a sufficient level of sort of expertise and sophistication relative to understanding what that position needs, what skills, background, et cetera, are involved in that process of selecting good candidates. So anytime in our process when we have a selection committee and interview committee is trusting that selection committee is, you know, taking out implicit bias and is evaluating the competencies of those people to be able to do the work. So there's a trust there that they've done that well. So the presumption is anyone that's coming forward for interview is, as best they can tell at that point, able to do the work. And so from that point, then they're trying to solicit from those interview candidates, you know, who's best for us. And in that process, I mean, you know, the candidates are made aware of whether, you know, and what and, you know, each of the different parts are and what they've seen or haven't seen. So we make it explicit when people do an interview that the interview group has not seen resumes, and that's intentional because, again, it brings bias, and so we're trying to decouple bias from the process so that we're selecting the best candidates possible. So what we do particularly in a principal circumstance is we ask them to give a presentation of and forgive me, because it would be like a short lesson if it was a teacher, but it's not a lesson. It's obviously, something along the lines of, oh, I've got an initiative that I'd like to implement. It would be like this. Here's how I go about it. Here's the process I would follow. And they'll give a presentation. That'll be part of how they demonstrate their skill ability, capability, process, thinking, an approach to leading a building. And that's one piece. And then a series of questions, obviously, that will be germane to the job. And so they're going to have to paint the picture of their capacity and capability for that interview committee. And again, the process we've had, and when we do it well, I think it has helped us to hire highly qualified candidates that also give opportunities to more diverse candidates, because that process takes out biases that will sometimes negatively impact the ability for how people view and evaluate a particular candidate, because I've participated in both parts of both selection and in the interviews, and it is a very different process than sort of traditional ones where you see resumes and you come to realize how, when you reflect on past process versus this process, you get a strong sense of how you might bring bias unintentionally to the review and evaluation of a candidate in the interview. So anyway, so back to sort of how the selection will happen again. If there's a modest number of candidates, probably 10 or fewer, we'll probably interview all of them. If it's more than that, we're probably going to have a selection committee that's going to review and make some choices about whether people are truly appropriate to be interviewed. Sometimes it's curious how some of these work. I mean, occasionally you'll get applications that are clearly not appropriate applicants. People will fill out the application, submit it, and they'll have managed to Cumberland Farms or something. And it's like, well, that's not the same as leading a building, right? So you'll get things like that. And I'm not faulting people who are aspirational in what they're doing, but sometimes they don't recognize what it really is going to take to be a viable candidate. So, but nonetheless, again, it depends on how many candidates we get and whether or not we'll need to do that selection process. And again, usually when we do that, so there's a certain amount of training we do around people doing its selection so that they are aware of and try to work against implicit bias. And they'll also need to have a sufficient level of sophistication relative to understanding the needs of a building leader and what sort of qualifications, background, experience, et cetera, that are on people's resumes are part and parcel of determining if that's someone to move forward or not.
So I'm hearing you say that the standard hiring process that was put in place by the former assistant superintendent will be used for this search, where there's maybe a selection committee, maybe not, depending on how many applicants, and then a separate interview committee that doesn't see the CVs and documentation of the applicants. That's my understanding of how the previous process / existing process works. So I applaud the goal of minimizing implicit bias. I don't think you can ever really eliminate it, but I applaud the goal of minimizing it. But I think that there are other possibly better ways of doing that, as opposed to the process that's been in place that the former assistant superintendent put in place. I've talked with a few people who have been involved on search committees with that process, and they all expressed a deep level of discomfort with the idea that the interview committee never sees the resumes and CVs of the applicants. I think it's just, in theory, I can understand one might think that would remove implicit bias, but it's so unconventional, it makes people uncomfortable. That's the input that I've gotten from people who've been on search committees. And there's even been, in the reports that were recently released, there've been some stories and criticisms of that process. So I guess I would urge you to reconsider using that process. So that's one piece of feedback. Also, I think you said that if there were a relatively low number of applicants, then you wouldn't have a selection committee. In that case, would the interview committee see the CVs of the applicants? I would think they would need to. Because if there's a low number of applicants, there may still be ones that are not qualified. So I'm encouraging you to rethink the process. This is a really, really important position. Obviously, any building principal is a really important position, but especially this position, especially right now, it's important that we earn the trust of the community.
So I'll pose this question to you. And again, I spoke to this earlier about the sort of trust with selection committee versus interview committee. I would suggest, and again, this is, that it is inherent that the interview committee must trust that the credentials have been vetted sufficiently and that whoever they're interviewing is of a caliber that they are purely discerning whether they're the right person for our district. Do they have the right, they may have demonstrated via their CV and all that sort of stuff that they have the experience and skills, whatever. Then they need to demonstrate to the interview committee that they're the right fit for us. So I think there's a difference here, and I think this is the part that is hard for people, and I get why. But if you trust that who's been put before you has this necessary credentials, however you want to define those, whether it be educational background, experience, whatever, if you trust that that has been presented to you with a candidate of a sufficient level of perceived caliber for the work, then there's no need to see their CV, in my opinion. And the reason for that is because anything that's telling you has been already elucidated by the previous group, and so your focus is on, and the focus of that group is on is different, and it is not a traditional interview. So that's the other thing, is that the interview committee its focus is different than a traditional interview committee, in that it's much more narrowly focused on is this the right person for us? And we have opportunities, especially in this particular circumstance, where a broader range of people get to ask questions. So when we have community forums, those are other interviews, and a broader set of people that all provide feedback. And that's been a part of our process for years and years, independent of this particular thing. I think, in critiques of our of the system we've used are generally around, have we done it well? I'm not suggesting we always do it well. In other words, does our selection committee always, and has it always operated properly? Has it been usurped in some ways at times? Has it been compromised in other ways? Similarly for the interview committee, has that been, the fidelity to the process been maintained? That's separate from whether the sort of structural thing is okay. I would argue that the structure of what we have been doing, when executed properly, is very valid, and it's very different. And I think that the interview process is very different. It's not, and what you're evaluating from that person, the kinds of questions you want to ask, the kinds of things you ask them to demonstrate are very different than is traditionally the case. And the fortunate thing, I think, in particular with the principal, and this is partly because of, as you say, the sort of import of these folks is getting them into these community forums and having them interact a second time with our interview committee, watching that, getting those feedback, broader groups of people also seeing, asking questions, et cetera. So it's a multiple interview process at that point. That gets a little deeper, gets a little broader perspective on the individual. So it's not a sort of solo, did they have a good day for that hour that we spoke to kind of situation. There's less of that in this circumstance because we have these other opportunities to sort of solicit more of who they are in these forums and that sort of thing.
Point of order. 2.5 hours. All right.
Okay, so I will make a motion that we extend our meeting by 30 minutes.
Second.
All in favor of extending our meeting? Passes. Thank you.
So, thank you. I have two responses to that, Doug. Your timeline, the timeline doesn't indicate that there will be a selection committee, and you haven't mentioned who would be on the selection committee. So the question is, if we're asking the interview committee to trust the selection committee, who are they being asked to trust? So, as I've said, if we're going to have community members and staff on the committee, we have trust issues in this district right now, and so we're asking people to trust. But who are we asking them to trust? So that's one question. And then, this hypothetically, the selection committee deems X number of applicants qualified and hands them over, or worthy of qualified, let's say, and hands them over to the interview committee. The interview committee may trust that group is qualified and will probably discern that from talking to that group. But then there's the people left over who didn't get forwarded to the interview committee. The interview committee doesn't know if there are people in that group who maybe they would have considered, or someone, people are complicated and situations are complicated. There may be someone in that pile or that number of people who didn't get passed on to be interviewed that someone else might have thought was qualified. So I don't.
I would suggest a classic model has that same flaw.
What's the classic model?
Classic model of just a single group of people that are doing both selection and interview has similar flaws, I should say, I would suggest. And so it's inherently a flawed process because it involves human beings, and it requires everyone to make decisions with partial information. That's always the case. You never really know the full totality of who you've got until they've been there and been working for you for any number of months or years or whatever, right? So I think that's the other, another piece I would bring to the conversation. And I think around who would be on the selection committee, I think that, recent hires in those kind of positions, we've not had a need for a selection committee. There have not been that many. I mean, I think, if there were, let's say there were 8 candidates, Human Resources collects this information. If there were concerns about who might be one of those, like, do we really interview all 8? Sometimes we will regardless. And so, and if someone's not qualified, it'll be pretty clear in the interviews that they're not at the same caliber as the others. Generally speaking, I think it just reinforces the selection committee's frame that they bring to it. I think the other thing, as far as who's on the selection committee, it will largely be staff, and it'll be staff that have been trained. And so it's going to be, some of the same people. It won't be a parent guardian, but will it involve, faculty and staff, potentially the middle school? Yeah. So I'm guessing that, the likelihood is that, folks that have been trained in how to avoid implicit bias when looking at CVs and that sort of stuff that may have suggested they want to be on the interview committee are probably the candidates we're going to look at for the selection committee. So it's going to be a circumstance where, it's going to be people who are in the mix for the interview, and by virtue of, a variety of factors may or may not have been selected for that because there's a limited number of places and people that can do it. So, those aren't things that are held secret. So if interview committee was like, well, who's on selection committee? They can have that information. I don't know that there'd be any reason why that's not the case.
Okay, so first was Anna.
So, to sort of follow up with Jennifer's question, if there is only an interview committee, they will see the resumes because there's like no other way to do it?
No.
So how are you're just gonna send all, regardless of qualifications, all of the applicants are just gonna go to the interview committee and not have their resumes with them?
I think that if there was a candidate, I mean, it's not that you know, when people apply, you know, they sort of fill out and provide information. If there was any question about whether to move someone forward to an interview, then a selection committee process would be involved. But as I said, I think, you know, if the number of candidates is small, it will be clear in an interview if they are not appropriate.
So if there's 5 candidates that apply,
Yep.
you will just bring them all in for interviews and throw away their resumes?
Well, we're not going to throw them away, but they won't be made available to the interview committee. So
That doesn't
right.
make any sense to me at all. That doesn't make any
Uh,
sense to me
again,
at all.
you know,
There has to be at least someone has to look at those resumes and say, do they meet the bare minimum?
Right. Well, I mean, to apply for the position, like I said, if you know, they apply for the position, Human Resources as a department sees all of those. If there's anything that would be problematic with regard to that, then that would trigger the need for a selection committee to review more extensively. If they were all, you know, of a sufficient caliber of candidate, then that's the work of the interview committee to elicit that information from them.
Okay, I think maybe I'm just old school and I don't think that is a great framework for selecting candidates. But what I want to know, so for instance, what if you are the selection committee and you find that there's one candidate who really stands out, and that there are 2 candidates or 1 candidate maybe that meets all the qualifications. There's nothing terrific about them, but there's nothing that says, red flag, you can't hire this person. Do they forward both of those candidates, or do they just forward the candidate who's excellent?
No, anyone that is of a sufficient level of qualified for the position would be moved forward. Because
Okay,
again,
so-
the interview
but now,
process.
what if there's
Well,
3 excellent candidates and 6 okay candidates? Now how many do they forward?
They might forward all 9. I think that, you know, I think that's where the selection committee, you know, sort of earns their keep. They have to make those decisions about who and what is a sufficient level of caliber that is to be moved forward. Because again, how they look in that process and how they then go through the interview process, those are very different, you know, evaluations that are going on there. And so people that may look as just moderately okay may actually be, when the interview happens, a superior candidate. And vice versa. People
They
that
look like a superior candidate.
look like a superior candidate can go into the interview and be like, no, that's not at all the right person for our school. And there's a lot of complexity and richness to that conversation. So, you know, if people are of a sufficient caliber of candidate to move forward, they'll move them forward. And then the interview process is to discern, you know, are they and do they have what is appropriate for our district.
Okay, Katie was next.
Could you tell us the anticipated start date of the principal?
It would be for next school year, so July 1 would be the contract start date.
And then, in terms of selection criteria, is there any particular focus being made towards retention? Is there a way to screen to see how long people have been in past positions and why they left? Because we go through this cycle pretty regularly at the middle school level.
Some might suggest that's more us than the candidates, but I, however, so I think that's you know, when a selection committee is looking at candidates, I think that's you know, a factor they could consider. That's certainly a valid interview question as well. So if the interview committee wants to know that, it's like, tell us about your past history. Because again, they're not seeing a CV, so it's like, paint the picture. What's your career been? Where you been? What have you been doing? What's, you know, that's part and parcel of that process, how they explain themselves in circumstances. Because it could be you look at a CV and it's like, wow, they change jobs every year. And then you hear the story and it's like, oh, I got promoted 4 times. That's why my job changed every year. It wasn't because I wanted to change necessarily. It's like circumstances. I mean, you look at my circumstances, like, I went from working in an IS department to being finance director, and now I'm sitting in an interim superintendent position in a very short period of time.
And I guess my question would be, are the candidates made aware of this particular process? Because if I'm someone interviewing, I'm assuming you've seen my
No, absolutely, absolutely.
CV, so then I'm not gonna elaborate extensively, so I think it's important that they
No,
know.
it's absolutely a critical part of the process to paint that picture, because it is, certainly all the interviews I participated in, that's a sort of preamble when we're sort of, starting the process, is to say, none of us have seen your CV or any of your resume, so you're gonna have to paint a picture for us. And that's also part of the process of crafting the questions is again, to sort of elucidate those things. And part of what we're gonna ask people to present to us is to paint those pictures and tell their story. Again, so they present their CV, but via the interview process. And no one's gonna, if they say I went to, I don't know, UMass and got a master's degree or whatever, it's like, we're gonna presume they're not lying to us at that point. I mean, obviously, if we, that's part of the due diligence after the fact. It's like, oh, they said they were gonna master's at UMass, and then, that proves to be false. It's like, well, we're not gonna hire someone who lied outright in their interview, right? So, but making that clear to folks is only fair, quite frankly, because it's such a different process, and it is appropriate so that they can prepare how they're going to interview, because how you prepare for that interview is very different when you do that.
Roger?
I'm old school too, but I agree with Doug. I'll tell you why. Because it is a multifaceted approach at finding what someone is all about. There's what's on the paper, and that's good, and the selection committee says, oh, that's good, that's good, that's good, that's good. The interviewers, because of what you just said, when the candidate is interviewed, they have to paint the picture. But the best part is if the interview committee shows up at the community forums where the questions may be a little bit, because people have different concerns, and how they handle that, how they handle a crowd. That's very important. And I only can say this from a veteran teacher thing, but watching that process with the student teachers that I taught, I knew you could take the paper away and just have them give them a paintbrush and they could paint their picture. They would do a good job. They were qualified. They worked with me, so they better be. But the important part was they could paint the picture. They knew children. So even though I am old school, this approach allows you to look at a lot of different facets. And if it didn't work in the past, it wasn't the methodology, it was the people who did it. And I just want to make that clear. So, but I am old school.
William?
So, I just lost my train of thought. Anyway, sorry. So what he said about it was different people. So I feel that a lot of us are talking about a concern if there's a selection committee or not a selection committee. So if there's not a selection committee, who receives the applications and kind of passes it yes or passes it no? Like I mean, if it's like, my dog and he applies for the job, like when that application comes in, who is that person that says, yeah, this person is can't even be qualified. They're not qualified. They don't meet the minimum requirements if there's not a selection committee.
Right. HR has a responsibility to make sure that sort of, all the materials that are necessary for the application are in the application.
And would it be the two people that are, because it's two people in charge of HR right now? So would it be the two people looking over those?
It would be a cooperative process for sure, because we'd want more than one set of eyes on it for sure.
So even if we didn't have a selection committee, I'm hearing that the two people from HR would make sure that the candidates were qualified bare minimum before they passed them all on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, Gabriella?
I just wanted to say that I've been involved in a lot of search processes in my career for people in leadership positions and others. And I've certainly never seen it done this way, but I've also been trained on implicit bias issues with respect to hiring, and I can really see the benefits of splitting it this way, with the caveat being that I can really see the benefits if, in fact, that first step can be trusted. Right, so, yeah, I'm hearing concerns about that, and as long as there can be checks and balances in place to ensure that that first step doesn't itself introduce some sort of bias in terms of who goes forward and who doesn't. I think that leaving the looking at the CV out of the process where people are looking for fit and looking for, how that person expresses themselves, I think that would actually, I can see how that can lead to very good outcomes. So I'm supportive, but I would say there needs to be some assurance that that first step, whoever it involves, be extremely trustworthy.
Yeah, it's very critical with this kind of decoupling of pieces that both pieces have a high level of integrity, so that the interviewers have confidence that who's in front of them to be interviewed is someone that is got the potential to do the job and do it well, and so that's inherently important that selection committee is very conscientious in its process, and understanding, again, trying to take implicit bias out of how they are interpreting materials that they're seeing, and understanding what is it really telling us, and how much is it telling us, and not over projecting points of view onto what's on the page, right? So it's critical for both pieces to function at a very high level for this to be a successful process.
So we need to start moving on. So Anna had her hand up, and then Jennifer, and then we have to move on to our next topic.
So what I wanted to know is, what are you going to do differently for this search than what happened for the previous middle school search to ensure that we don't have a failed search this time? And specifically, how are you going to, my understanding is we got a very small number of candidates to apply, and how are you going to try to get more candidates to apply for this position so that perhaps we aren't limited to such a small candidate pool, or, inviting failure?
There's a few different things we can do there. Obviously, we'll do whatever outreach is possible and necessary and appropriate, and if we just sort of put it on our sort of school spring listing, that's not a very active search. It's a very passive sort of search. And I don't know with the last search how actively we searched. I think in the current environment, we're going to have to be much more proactive in seeking candidates from different sources. So in some of the same ways you're thinking about with regard to the superintendent search, I think some of those same kinds of avenues and techniques we'll have to look into and explore, whether there are, there's, what's it, MASPA? Massachusetts Association of School Principals, is one organization. Obviously, there's, once upon a time you did stuff like you took out ads in publications, that kind of thing. It's not as much the case now, but there are certainly kinds of advertisement and active, sort of search areas and locations that we can be participating in. And I think we'll have to be honest, because the broader pool of candidates, the better options we have, no doubt.
Jennifer?
I'll be quick. So, Doug, I have 3 suggestions for you based on input that I've heard from community members and staff who've been involved in searches before. The first is that the interview committee be tasked with designing the questions for the interviews and not be prescribed a list of questions. That the group, the interview committee, including the school staff, be tasked with coming up with the questions. The second is that the interview committee discuss and deliberate as a committee about each of their interviewees, so that people on the committee can hear input from other members of the committee. And third, that the committee vote on finalists.
So I'll have to say, in the interview committees I participated, that's exactly the process.
Great. Those are weaknesses I've heard from the way this process has been conducted in the past, but I'm glad to hear that that's standard practice for you.
Yeah, and I think that obviously there may be certain questions that we want to pose that's where we lean on the experience of human resource professionals, and I think that's part of why if you look at that spectrum of folks we're putting on the interview committee, it's like, all right, what questions do you bring? And then we want to ask the same questions of everyone, so that there's an equity there. So it'll be a cooperative process as far as that part's concerned. Certainly the discussion of candidates, we usually they'll discuss usually a rating sheet. And so sometimes sort of vote on candidates, if you do a rating sheet, there's ways to do that where you score it and that sort of stuff. But sometimes it's, if scores sort of come out equal, then it's like, all right, now we have to talk about the more, esoteric and, soft skill, qualitative things, not quantitative kind of things. It's part of a conversation that happens at that point. And again, I think in some ways the fortunate thing for this interview committee is they're selecting finalists, plural. They may have a clear in their mind who they think, and then that's where I think the advantage of this is with community forums. Then, somebody that may have interviewed really well, everybody was thinking, wow, they're the bee's knees, gets to community forum and you're like, oh, it's a whole different thing, right? And that's the great additional aspect of this type of search that has that other layer, which is necessary in a lot of ways because they do, a principal will interact with the broader public and be needing to engage in those kind of forums and that sort of thing. So you get to see a much different piece of that. So I think that'll be critical feedback as well. But yeah, I fully expect that those sort of steps are like I said, in the ones I've been involved with, the committee built questions, obviously in communication with HR to see if there's certain things you can't ask, so it's like, oh, let's not violate the law here. But certainly, having that conversation after each minute, talking about how we're thinking about it, what our thoughts are, record that into our scoring sheets, and then to ultimately sort of gather that information collectively, is what we want to do.
Okay, so we have less than 10 minutes on our most recent extension of our meeting. So if we can be focused and try to be done before we run out of time again, I think that would be fantastic. So our next, now we get to talk about the discussion on a proposed subcommittee regarding the investigative reports, which was requested Jennifer and I think Anna. So did you want to start?
Sure. So the idea is to create an ad hoc subcommittee of the regional school committee of, again, it needs to be fewer than a quorum, so 4 people, to review the reports, the redacted reports that were published over a series of meetings, over several weeks and months. And as a subcommittee, come up with suggestions on actions the school committee could take. So again, a subcommittee doesn't vote on things and make decisions on behalf of the school committee. But similar to the subcommittee for a new superintendent, the subcommittee can come up with recommendations on actions and votes or whatever that the school committee could take. And they would need to be things that are within the purview of a school committee. But I think that with the release of these redacted reports, the community is going to demand and has a right to know how the school committee is going to respond. So my suggestion is creating a subcommittee to do that and then make recommendations to the full committee.
So when we think about this, I just want us to be very careful and clear of what is under our purview and what is not. So making employment recommendations or anything along those lines is not our job to do. We can look at policy. So I just want us to be very careful about making sure we kind of stay in our lane. Gabriella?
Yeah, thank you for making that clarification, Sarah Bess. But even with that lane defined, I think there are a lot of things that we can look at and discuss. So I'm very supportive of this idea of establishing a subcommittee to look at these reports, to really dig into them and to bring some suggestions to the school committees to vote on. But I would like to suggest that the subcommittee include some people who are not members of the school committee as part of the group of people. These documents are public. There's just as much information that somebody from outside the school committee has as people from the school committee. And those members who are on the school committee can be the ones who bring particular topics as for a suggested motion or action on the part of the school committee. But I think it would be valuable to have the viewpoint of members of the community. We can decide perhaps how to include that. I don't think this subcommittee should be large because otherwise that will make the work very complex, but that subcommittee can include ways that that are very directed, that can allow the community to have input. Sorry, it's late, I'm having trouble putting my thoughts together, but have ways for the community to provide input that subcommittee can include in their deliberations, or sorry, their discussions. And I think it would also go a long way to the trust building that we've been working toward, to include folks who are not members of this body in that group.
William?
I totally agree that we need to have community members and staff members or whatever members to be listened to and heard. I would just say that because we have to stay in such a narrow lane of policy and what we can do as a school committee, I would maybe think that if we had a small subcommittee from just within, and then we could have listening sessions, roundtable sessions, public forums to bring that voice in, and we could then deliberate that as that small subcommittee, but not actually have members of the public on the small subcommittee. Just because we do have to stay narrowly focused, but I do think it's really important for us to have some kind of a venue for the public to speak freely, even if it's not within our narrow lane. And I would be I don't think it's appropriate maybe for all of us to sit here and listen to all of that, but I think it's appropriate for people to have a voice. And I think this subcommittee could offer that roundtable listening session something. So I'm very much for having the community involvement, but maybe in a different way.
Anna?
So I think it's very important for the committee to take on this task. Because of what the RSC is able to do and what their purview is, my question is this better done within the policy committee that's already established, or do we need to create a whole separate subcommittee just to do this task?
I think Katie?
Thank you for bringing it to the table and putting it on the agenda. I've also thought through this idea of the fact that we have one source of data, if you will, or five multiple, if you want to call them each individual, that provides us a lot of insight. At the same time, it's by, looking at things through the same lens, it's redacted. And I want to just remind us, and maybe the idea is to start, a subcommittee to get the conversation going, but there's also a policy which was adapted in 2015 that looks specifically at school climate data collection and analysis, which might be another tool that we can use, or a policy that we can reference to make a larger, more inclusive study, looking at some of the fundamental themes from those original 5 investigative reports.
Jennifer?
I just want to address Anna's question about whether this work is best done by the existing policy subcommittee. I think that the recommendations that could be brought forward that are within the school committee's purview as a result of these reports is more than just policies. Policies are going to be an important part of it, and maybe one of the things this subcommittee would do would be to suggest to the school committee that they task the policy subcommittee with creating or modifying or whatever, amending a policy. But the school committee also has purview over the hiring of the superintendent and jointly with the superintendent, the hiring and appointing of an assistant superintendent. So one of the things the subcommittee could come up with is like, we should have an assistant superintendent of X, or we should have 2 assistant superintendents of X and Y, or whatever. Like, and so those are things, those are not necessarily under policy, but those are things that the school committee has purview over jointly with the superintendent. And then also the school committee approves the budget. So there might be a budget-related recommendation that comes before the school. So I think it's bigger than just policy.
Gabriella?
So I agree with Jennifer's points, and I just want to address William's point that I think that there are a lot of really intelligent people in this community, and I think that we can certainly find people who will know what it means to stay within the lane of what we have purview over. But I'm particularly concerned to have the input of people who bring a different perspective to this than, you know, the group of people who are always in the school committee mode of thinking. So I think it would be valuable. It would bring us some additional dimensions to the conversation, and it's really just to get those ideas. There still can be avenues for gathering broader input, but I think in terms of interpreting and having deep discussions, I really would like to see some additional voices in there.
Tillman?
I just want to note that public participation during agenda items is permissible as long as the chair, or in this case subcommittee chair, approves that. So it's certainly possible that anybody can participate at the chair, who is invited by the chair, and so it's not necessary that somebody be formally appointed. I try to look at the policy to see if we can appoint subcommittee members that are not part of the school committee. It doesn't speak to that, and it seems strange because it's a subcommittee of a existing committee. So
if it doesn't speak to it, we can do whatever we want.
So there is a difference between a subcommittee and an advisory committee, and I think when we start adding members of the public, it becomes an advisory committee rather than a subcommittee. So a subcommittee is a faction of us that is not a quorum, and rather the advisory committee includes members of the public. Jennifer?
I move that we create a subcommittee tasked with reviewing the investigative reports and making recommendations on actions the school committee could take.
I'm just trying to get the language down. I can only type so fast. I'm sorry.
A subcommittee tasked with reviewing the investigative reports and making recommendations on actions the school committee could take.
Okay. Create a subcommittee tasked with reviewing the investigative reports and make recommendations to the school that the school committee can take.
Recommendations on actions the school committee could take.
On actions the school committee can take. Okay. Thank you. Any discussion? More discussion? Yep.
Just, do we need to specify the size of the committee or anything like that?
It must be less than a quorum, so it has to be 4 or less. I don't think we have to say specifically how many. Okay. So, all in favor of creating a investigative report subcommittee to make recommendations for actions to the school committee? All right. So now, do we?
Sorry, was that?
Yep.
Was that 8 in favor?
Yes. Sorry. I'm trying to decide if we can create our school committee, our subcommittee, like who is on it right now.
Can we wait?
May I make a suggestion?
Yes, Gabriella.
3 of us are only going to be present for 2 more meetings, which might make it useful to wait,
Okay, that is a good point.
since you're not going to include members of the public in the
Jennifer?
subcommittee.
I don't think we necessarily need to wait for that reason, because the 3 of you are full members of the school committee and are eligible to serve on a subcommittee. And any subcommittee that you serve on, we will need to reorganize when the new members join. So I don't think we necessarily need to wait. And I don't think the 3 of you necessarily need to not be on the subcommittee.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to imply that we need to wait, but just as a consideration, if that was something you wanted to.
Yep, Anna?
I would like some time to figure out if I have time to be on the subcommittee, because I'm balancing a lot of different things right now, and it's something that I'm interested in, but at the same time, I'm a little bit crushed right now, and I need a little bit of time to figure it out, so I would appreciate another week to sort of decide.
I think that's a very fair request. So our next item is future agenda planning, so perhaps we can add that then. Okay.
Do we need to extend our time, technically?
Yes.
Are there warrants or gifts? If there are none, we're done.
There are warrants.
Okay. So how about we extend our meeting for 10 minutes?
Second.
Okay. All in favor of 10 minutes? 7.
Gotcha.
Okay.
We gotta go fast.
All right. So future agenda, Katie?
Just making sure you have the tabled motion from earlier, as well as you had said you wanted the boosters.
Yep.
Thanks.
And establishing the committee.
Got that.
The SNS will bring forward the input from the school committee to the search firm on the job posting.
Oh, okay.
William?
That Maureen Fleming will be coming.
Oh, yeah.
And could we have a conversation about if there's a hiring process policy, what that looks like?
Maybe more generally speaking, the policy subcommittee has a meeting on Thursday from 6 to 8. All are invited. Can we follow up with you via email if something comes out of that meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I guess I was also going to add, could we look at what our subcommittees are and do we need them, and are they actively involved, meeting or not?
Look,
Update on the activity.
I know we had, like, a few meetings ago, we voted who was going to be on the different subcommittees, or the advisory committees. Could we do a quick rundown of, are they active, are they not? Do we need them, do we not?
So they are all listed on board docs, and the only standing subcommittees we have are the budget and audit, policy, and superintendent evaluation. And then there is an advisory committee, which is the school equity advisory committee.
Okay.
So yes, we need all of them. There are a few other roles and tasks.
Could we have the school equity as an agenda advisory?
Like
An update, or if it's a useful,
let's connect.
I'm just trying to figure out if we could put that on the agenda,
I
just
think given
in
our-
subcommittees in general, like,
The date
do we
of the
need them?
advisory committee is the day after our next regional
Okay.
school committee, so maybe from that we can.
Anything else? Okay. Yep.
Can we put on a bullying update on the committee, on the agenda, just so that it's,
Yep, I have it on here. Are there any warrant reports?
yes.
Yeah, I have some too.
You wanna go first?
Sure. I have 4. I, Gabriella Weaver, authorized by my signature to the MS transfer request in the amount of $5,939.29 for the transfer request dated 10/25/23. On 10/27/23, I, Gabriella Weaver, authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $1,128,275.51. This includes general fund expenses of $939,681.01, revolving fund expenses of $95,704.67, grant fund expenses of $82,827.14, and gifts and $10,062.69 capital. 2 more. I, Gabriella Weaver, authorize payroll in the amount of $847,879.74 dated 11/1/23. And the last one, I, Gabriella Weaver, authorized by my signature to the HS transfer request in the amount of $22,965.58 for the transfer request dated 10/25/23.
I, William Scher, authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $515,769,007, included general funds expense of $421,940.43, revolving fund expenses of $32,551.26, grant fund expenses of $59,895.54, other funds $341.04, gifts and $1,040.80 capital. That was dated November 15th. I, William Scher, authorized by my signature payable in the amounts of $166,118.64. This includes general funds expenses of $166,118.64. That was dated November 17th. And one last one. I, William Scher, authorized my signature in the amount, by my signature in the amount of payroll, $851,824.71, dated November 29th, 2023.
Excellent. So, no gifts? I will enter.
I move we adjourn.
Jennifer?
Second?
Is that Roger?
Yes.
All in favor? Are we all in favor of adjourning?
Sorry.
Thank you. We are adjourned.